I am Zara, 35 years old, and a high-level forensic wealth manager. I recently finalized a brutal divorce and moved across the world to Paris to escape the toxic fallout of my marriage. My ex-husband Andre immediately threw a $500,000 wedding to marry his mistress, determined to show Atlanta high society that he had traded up. I stayed quiet and let them think they had won. But right in the middle of their lavish reception, a very specific guest delivered a message that brought his fake luxury empire crashing down in front of everyone. Minutes later, my phone rang. Before I share how I legally dismantled his entire life from a balcony in France, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is served mathematically cold. The morning air in Paris was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh rain on cobblestones and baking brioche from the patisserie downstairs. I sat on the wrought iron balcony of my apartment in the Marais district, wrapped in a thick silk robe. The city was just waking up, the pale sunlight catching the steam rising from my espresso cup. It was a picture of absolute untouchable peace. I had spent the last 8 months fighting through the ugliest betrayal of my life, clawing my way out of the emotional wreckage Andre had left behind. Today, I was finally breathing free air. Then my phone began to vibrate against the glass patio table. It buzzed violently, rattling against my saucer, inching its way toward the edge of the table with desperate urgency. I did not need to look at the screen to know who was calling. I already knew the exact time. It was just past 4 in the afternoon in Atlanta. I let it vibrate for a few seconds, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, savoring the rich, dark flavor. When I finally picked up the device, Andre's name flashed across the screen. It was the first time he had called me since the ink dried on our divorce papers. I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply listened. The sound that erupted from the speaker was pure, unadulterated chaos. A heavy bass line from a wedding DJ thumped frantically in the background, clashing with the sound of a woman screaming hysterically. Somewhere close to the phone, a heavy glass shattered against a hard marble floor, followed by the angry shouting of men in the distance. "Zara? What did you do?" Andre screamed. His voice was completely stripped of that smooth, arrogant, luxury real estate broker tone he usually wore like a second skin. He was hyperventilating, his breath hitching in a way that bordered on a full-blown panic attack. "What the hell did you do to my accounts?" I leaned back in my chair, resting my bare feet on the cool metal of the balcony railing. I watched a flock of pigeons take off from a nearby slate roof, their wings cutting through the quiet morning. I said absolutely nothing. I let the silence stretch out, a stark contrast to the absolute disaster unfolding on his end of the line. "Zara, answer me right now!" Andre yelled, the desperation cracking his voice. "I am at my wedding reception. Do you hear me? I am standing in the middle of a historic mansion with 300 of the most important people in Atlanta, and my cards are declining. Every single one of my black cards is getting declined." The venue manager just pulled me into the hallway. He is threatening to cut the power and call the police because the final wire transfer for $50,000 bounced hard. Bounced, Zara. How does a wire transfer bounce on a corporate account? Through the receiver, I could clearly hear Jasmine. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the background noise like a panicked siren. "Andre, tell them to put the centerpieces back. Andre, they are taking the champagne towers down. Make them stop right now. This is my special day." Andre cursed loudly at someone in the background before returning to the phone. "Zara, my corporate accounts are locked. My personal accounts are showing a zero balance. I just called my private banker, and they told me there is a hard asset freeze on my entire portfolio due to a severe default execution. You did this. I know you did this. You hacked me. You used your forensic accounting voodoo to ruin my life. Because you are a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand to see me happy with someone better." His accusations washed over me like warm rain. 8 months ago, those exact words would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and tears. I would have argued with him. I would have defended my character. I would have begged him to see my worth and the years of hard work I had poured into supporting his lifestyle. During our marriage, I was the one who quietly covered his risky investments, quietly paid off the luxury cars he leased just to look successful, and quietly managed the mounting debt he accumulated to impress people who did not actually care about him. But a forensic wealth manager does not deal in emotions. We deal in ledgers, liabilities, and leveraged debt. And Andre had always been nothing more than a bad investment dressed in designer suits. "You need to fix this right now," Andre demanded, his voice dropping from an angry shout to a frantic begging whisper. "Please, Zara. The caterers are literally packing up the hot food. The mayor is sitting at table 4 watching the waitstaff take the plates away before anyone has even eaten. Jasmine is crying in the bridal suite, and her friends are recording this on their phones. You have to call whoever you know and lift this freeze. I will pay you back. I will give you whatever you want. Just unlock my money before I lose everything in front of this entire city." I let him rant for another full minute. I listened to the panic tearing through his carefully constructed reality. For years, Andre had made me feel like I was the boring one, the rigid numbers girl who did not understand how to live a high society lifestyle. He built his entire identity on projecting unimaginable wealth, using my financial stability to fund his grand illusions. Now that illusion was collapsing in real time, broadcast live to the exact elite audience he had spent a fortune trying to impress. I slowly lowered my cup back to the saucer. The porcelain made a soft, elegant clink that grounded me in the present moment. I looked down at my wrist, admiring the reflection of the Paris morning light on the face of my designer watch. The timing was mathematically perfect. The execution of the legal documents had gone exactly according to the strict schedule I had established. "Andre," I finally spoke, my voice low, steady, and completely devoid of any emotional inflection. He stopped rambling instantly. He was breathing heavily into the microphone, waiting for me to save him. Waiting for me to be the reliable fixing wife I had always been, to bail him out of his own hubris. "Did Mr. Sterling enjoy the champagne toast before he delivered the bad news?" I asked. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The background music seemed to instantly fade away. The shouting vanished into the void. I could practically hear the blood freezing in Andre's veins. He did not say a single word. He could not. The trap had finally closed around him, and he had just realized that there was absolutely no way out. 8 months before that pathetic phone call from Paris, the true foundation of my marriage completely crumbled. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just pulled my car into the circular driveway of our sprawling, custom-built estate in Buckhead. I was physically exhausted, but mentally sharp, riding the high of successfully closing a massive corporate audit. For 3 days straight, I had been buried in complex financial forensics, untangling a web of offshore accounts for a major logistics firm. My brain was entirely calibrated to detect fraud, pinpoint liabilities, and expose hidden deficits. I walked through the heavy double doors of the home I had meticulously funded and designed, expecting to drop my briefcase, pour a glass of water, and finally decompress. Instead, I found the fraud sitting right on my living room couch. Jasmine was lounging on my imported white leather sofa with her bare feet propped up on the custom marble coffee table. She was wearing a familiar emerald silk robe that I had purchased in Milan, and she was casually sipping a dark vintage Cabernet from one of my favorite crystal wine glasses. She did not jump or attempt to hide when I walked into the room. She simply lowered the glass, looked me up and down with intense condescension, and flashed a slow, calculated smirk. I stood frozen in the foyer, my analytical mind processing the visual data before my emotions could even register the shock. Before I could demand an explanation or utter a single syllable, Andre stepped out from the hallway. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, one of the many bespoke outfits I had quietly paid for to help him launch his luxury real estate career. He did not look guilty. He did not look remorseful. He looked utterly arrogant, radiating a toxic level of unearned confidence. He walked straight over to the massive kitchen island, holding a thick manila folder. Without breaking eye contact, he tossed the folder onto the quartz countertop. The heavy slap of paper against stone echoed through the quiet house. "Sign them!" Zara, Andre commanded, his voice dripping with an authority he absolutely did not possess. I am filing for divorce and I want this done quickly and quietly. I walked slowly toward the kitchen island, my eyes shifting from the legal documents to the man I had supported for 7 years. I did not scream or throw my bag. My profession trained me to remain completely detached when faced with sudden catastrophic variables. I looked at the papers, then back at him, waiting for the punchline of this absurd performance. "Do not look at me like that," Andre scoffed, puffing out his chest and adjusting his expensive silk tie. "You know this has been a long time coming. I am the king of Atlanta luxury real estate now. I am the face of success in this city. Every major developer, every athlete, every high-profile investor wants to do business with me. I have outgrown you, Zara. You are just a boring numbers girl. You drag down my brand." I kept my expression entirely neutral, studying the sheer delusion operating inside his brain. I had bankrolled his entire real estate license, funded his initial marketing campaigns, and paid the mortgage on this very estate, while he spent years trying to secure his first legitimate commission. Now that he had closed a few high-visibility deals and tasted local fame, he actually believed his own fabricated hype. "You come home smelling like stress and printer paper." Andre continued, stepping closer, emboldened by my silence. "You wear these stiff, rigid corporate suits. You refuse to attend the charity galas, you hate the country club mixers, and you never know how to play the game for the cameras. I need a woman who understands high society. I need a partner who knows how to network, who looks the part, who elevates my social capital. You just act like a glorified human calculator. You do not fit into my world anymore." Right on cue, Jasmine stood up from the sofa. She walked across the hardwood floor, the silk of my robe trailing behind her, and slipped her arm possessively through Andre's. She leaned her head against his shoulder, looking at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Andre is right, Zara." Jasmine chimed in, her voice coated in a sickly sweet tone. "A man of his caliber needs a trophy, a real woman who knows how to cater to a king. You are too masculine, always working, always obsessed with spreadsheets and audits. Andre needs someone who knows how to host a dinner party, someone who knows how to dress for the red carpet. Your fashion sense is honestly embarrassing for a man of his status." She reached out and traced the edge of the quartz countertop with her manicured fingernail, looking around my massive, immaculate kitchen, as if she were inspecting a property she had just purchased. "Besides," Jasmine added, flipping her long hair over her shoulder, "this house is finally going to have a real lady of the manor. The first thing I'm going to do is redecorate the master suite. Your taste is entirely too cold and rigid. We need something warmer, something that actually feels like a luxury lifestyle, not a corporate boardroom." I stared at the two of them, a matched pair of financial liabilities standing in a house they could not afford to heat without my income. They were entirely oblivious to the reality of their situation. Andre genuinely believed his social media follower count translated to actual liquid wealth. Jasmine genuinely believed she had successfully stolen a millionaire. They were standing on a trapdoor demanding that I hand them the rope. I looked down at the divorce papers on the island. The bold black letters on the front page demanded the dissolution of our marriage. I could see the preliminary demands listed on the second page. Andre wanted the house. He wanted the luxury vehicles. He wanted the primary joint accounts. He wanted everything that projected the image of a self-made mogul. "You have lost your mind, Andre." I finally spoke, my voice deathly calm, cutting through the heavy tension in the room. "You do not own a single brick of this estate." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that bounced off the high ceilings. "I am the man of this house, Zara. I built our social network. I brought in the connections. Without my image, you are just a lonely accountant living in a big, empty box. You are going to sign those papers, you are going to leave everything intact, and you are going to walk away quietly. If you try to fight me, I will drag you through a public trial so ugly it will ruin your precious corporate reputation. Atlanta society will eat you alive." I looked at his face, searching for any trace of the man I had married, any flicker of the partner I had built my life around. There was nothing left but pure, unadulterated vanity and greed. My mind immediately shifted from shock into forensic analysis mode. I was no longer looking at a husband. I was looking at a hostile corporate takeover, and I knew exactly how to dismantle him. Before I could respond to his ridiculous threat, the heavy mahogany front door swung open with a loud creak. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by the rustling of cardboard. Vivian, Andre's mother, marched into the kitchen. She was dressed in her typical Sunday best, her face set in a mask of absolute disdain. She did not look surprised to see Jasmine standing there in my robe. She did not look ashamed that her son was actively destroying his marriage. Vivian carried a large stack of flattened, heavy-duty cardboard moving boxes. She marched straight past her son, walked directly up to where I was standing, and dropped the heavy stack onto the floor right at my feet. She grabbed the top box, snapped it open into a square, and shoved it aggressively against my chest. "Start packing, Zara," Vivian demanded, her voice cold and completely devoid of any empathy. "The time for being the lady of this house has officially expired." I stared at the flattened cardboard boxes resting against the toes of my custom Italian heels. The sheer audacity of the gesture hung in the heavy air of the kitchen, suffocating and sharp. I slowly lifted my eyes from the brown cardboard to the woman who had dropped them there. Vivian did not even flinch under my intense gaze. She stepped around the boxes, her chin raised high, projecting the false aristocracy she had spent her entire adult life trying to perfect. She was dressed in her typical Sunday best, a tailored linen suit and pearl earrings, looking every bit the proud matriarch. She walked directly over to the living room area and placed a perfectly manicured hand on Jasmine's shoulder, lightly patting the emerald silk of my stolen robe. "It is nothing personal," Zara Vivian said, her tone dripping with a fake sugary sympathy that felt infinitely worse than a physical blow. "You are just not the right fit for my son. You frankly never were. Andre is a visionary black man. He is building a legacy in this city, a real estate empire. He needs a woman who knows how to stand beside him, how to soften his edges, how to entertain the elite of Atlanta. You are a soulless calculator. You come home, you stare at your spreadsheets, and you treat this marriage like a corporate merger. You never knew how to nurture his spirit." I looked at Vivian, my mind flashing back to the $40,000 wire transfer I had quietly sent to her private bank account just 6 months ago to save her own home from foreclosure. A soulless calculator. That was what she called the woman who had silently and consistently funded her entire illusion of high society grandeur. She had gladly accepted my money to keep up appearances at her country club, but now that her son had found a woman who played the role of a subservient trophy, my usefulness had expired. Jasmine leaned into Vivian's touch, casting a triumphant, glowing glance in my direction. She took another sip of my Cabernet and smiled. "We just want different things," Jasmine cooed, her voice pitched artificially high to sound delicate and harmless. "Andre deserves a wife who actually wants to build a family, not just a stock portfolio. He needs a woman with the right pedigree, someone who fits into his elite circle naturally without having to force it. He needs a woman who makes him feel like the king he truly is." Andre cleared his throat, stepping forward, clearly emboldened by his mother's vicious support and his mistress's blind adoration. He tapped his heavy gold ring against the manila folder resting on the kitchen island. "We are not doing this all night," he said, his voice hardening into a cold, transactional command. "I had my lawyers draft a preliminary separation agreement. It is highly generous considering the circumstances and your utter lack of emotional contribution to this household." He slid the thick stack of legal documents across the smooth quartz countertop until they stopped inches from my hands. "I am keeping the Buckhead estate," Andre announced, gesturing expansively to the massive kitchen, the sweeping vaulted ceilings, and the floor-to-ceiling windows around us. "It is the primary asset tied to my public image. I entertain high-net-worth clients here. I host commercial developers here. My entire brand is built on this house. It is non-negotiable. I am also taking the 2 Range Rovers, and I am maintaining sole ownership of the primary business operating accounts for the real estate firm." My eyes flicked down to the pages resting on the counter. He was demanding the house, the cars, and the primary business accounts. He said the words with such immense pride, puffing his chest out as if he were a master negotiator seizing the crown jewels. He genuinely believed these things were assets. He genuinely believed they held actual liquid value. In a fraction of a second, my forensic mind ran the numbers, stripping away the luxury veneer and looking at the raw, bleeding data underneath. The Buckhead house had a massive predatory balloon mortgage that I was personally paying down from my own separate corporate salary. The two Range Rovers were not owned. They were on heavily leveraged corporate leases that required exorbitant monthly maintenance fees. The primary business accounts he was so desperate to protect were tied directly to his shadow holding company, a company which was currently hemorrhaging cash just to keep up the appearance of his fake billionaire lifestyle. He was not demanding assets from me. He was demanding a financial guillotine, and he was entirely too financially illiterate to realize it. By demanding these specific items, he was volunteering to take on a mountain of crushing debt without my income to subsidize it. "If you try to fight me on this," Andre continued, leaning his weight over the kitchen island, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me into submission, "I will make your life a living hell. You work in high-level corporate wealth management, Zara. Your entire career is based on discretion, trust, and absolute stability. If you drag me into a messy public divorce trial, I will go straight to the press. I will call every blog, every local magazine, and every society page in Atlanta. I will tell them you are an unstable, vindictive, hostile woman who tried to sabotage my real estate firm out of petty jealousy. Your high-level corporate clients will drop you the exact second their names are associated with our public trash. You will lose your job, your reputation, and your standing in this city. Sign the papers, pack your boxes, and walk away quietly." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a silver pen, and tossed it onto the documents. The metallic clatter echoed sharply against the stone. The kitchen went dead silent. The atmosphere was thick with tension, thick with the expectation of my imminent collapse. Vivian was glaring at me with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, daring me to challenge her son. Jasmine was swirling the dark wine in her glass, waiting eagerly for me to break down and cry, waiting for the satisfaction of seeing the successful wife shattered by the younger mistress. Andre was standing tall, his shoulders squared, looking down his nose at me. He was entirely convinced he had brilliantly outmaneuvered a master tactician. They expected tears. They expected me to scream, to throw the wineglass against the wall, to drop to my knees and beg for my marriage, or to launch into a furious, panicked legal debate. They expected the messy emotional breakdown of a defeated woman. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of absolute icy clarity. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice by even a fraction of a decibel. I looked at the three of them standing in my kitchen, a mother blindly enabling her son toward ruin, a mistress playing house in a home she could never afford, a husband drowning in invisible, suffocating debt while boasting about his wealth. They were a trinity of financial parasites who had somehow convinced themselves they were the apex predators of Atlanta. I ignored the cheap silver pen Andre had thrown on the counter. I reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out my own pen. It was a custom-weighted Mont Blanc, a gift I had purchased for myself after successfully exposing a multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement scheme the previous year. I twisted the cap. The sharp mechanical click sounded exceptionally loud in the quiet room. Without a word, without a sigh, without a single tremble in my hand, I pulled the thick separation agreement toward me. I flipped directly past the asset allocation breakdown, past the liability clauses, and straight to the final signature page. I did not bother reading the specific stipulations because I already knew exactly what they entailed. By signing this document, I was legally surrendering the massive mortgage, the toxic car leases, and the bleeding business accounts entirely to Andre. I was legally severing my name and my pristine credit score from his rapidly sinking ship. I pressed the gold nib of the pen against the thick paper and signed my name with fluid, decisive strokes. I initialed the designated boxes. I dated the bottom margin. I placed the cap back on my pen, dropped it into my bag, and pushed the signed documents back across the quartz island toward Andre. I looked him dead in the eyes, hiding the coldest, most calculating smile of my entire life. I had just handed him the exact rope he would use to hang himself. 3 weeks later, the air conditioning in the Midtown high-rise conference room was cranked so high it felt like an industrial meat locker. I sat across the sprawling mahogany table from Andre and his high-priced legal team. The hostility in the room was palpable, radiating almost entirely from my soon-to-be ex-husband. Andre was practically vibrating with smug energy. He wore a loud, custom-tailored crimson suit that screamed for attention, leaning so far back in his ergonomic leather chair, he was practically horizontal. He was treating the dissolution of our 7-year marriage like a victorious press conference. "Sign it and be done with it, Zara," Andre ordered, tapping his heavy knuckles against the polished wood. "My time is extremely valuable today. I have a commercial property viewing at 2 and a wedding cake tasting at 4. I do not have the patience to sit here while your lawyer reads through standard boilerplate text." His lead attorney, a man who billed $1,000 an hour simply to stroke Andre's massive ego, slid the final buyout agreement across the table. The paperwork stated that Andre was buying out my equity in the custom-built Buckhead estate for a flat sum of $250,000. It was an insulting, aggressive, lowball offer. The true equity in that house, before factoring in the toxic loans he had secretly taken out against it to fund his lifestyle, was easily over $1 million. He was trying to financially gut me, banking on the arrogant assumption that I was too emotionally devastated to endure a protracted legal battle over the remaining funds. Andre smirked at his lawyer, speaking about me as if I were not sitting 3 feet away. "I told you she would fold," Andre boasted, adjusting his diamond cufflinks so the light would catch them. "She does not have the stomach for a real fight. She is a background player. Always has been. She knows I hold all the cards in this city, and she knows she cannot afford to cross me." Kendra, Andre's sister, sat in the corner of the room on a plush leather sofa. She had insisted on attending the mediation as Andre's emotional support, though her actual purpose was clearly to act as an audience for his performance. She was busy typing furiously on her phone, undoubtedly updating her private social circles about her brother's victorious divorce settlement and trashing my name in the process. "You are getting off easy, Zara," Kendra sneered, not even bothering to look up from her glowing screen. "Andre could have left you with absolutely nothing. He built your entire social standing from the ground up. Without his last name attached to yours, the country club is going to revoke your membership by Friday. You will be completely erased from Atlanta high society in a month. Jasmine actually knows how to carry the family brand. You should be thanking my brother for tossing you this bone before he moves on to bigger and better things." I kept my face perfectly still, projecting the exact image of a defeated, exhausted wife that they so desperately wanted to see. I did not point out that the country club membership was paid entirely from my corporate salary. I did not mention that the diamond cufflinks Andre was currently adjusting were purchased on a credit card that was exactly 4 days away from being completely maxed out. I simply let them bask in their fabricated reality, absorbing their insults like a sponge soaking up evidence. "The funds for the buyout have been secured through a private leveraged loan," Andre's attorney announced, attempting to inject some level of professionalism back into the room. "My client has utilized his primary commercial holding company, Apex Luxury Holdings, to secure the necessary capital to expedite this separation. The cashier's check is prepared and ready for immediate transfer upon your signature." Andre snatched the white envelope from his attorney's hand before the man could even pass it to my legal counsel. He did not hand it over politely. He leaned across the wide table, his crimson suit jacket pulling tight across his broad shoulders, and physically slid the envelope across the mahogany wood until it bumped aggressively against my folded hands. "Take it," Andre commanded, his voice thick with condescension. "Take the $250,000, go buy yourself a modest little condo out in the suburbs, somewhere quiet, where you blend in with the rest of the working class. Stay out of my way while I build a real legacy with a woman who actually belongs in my tax bracket." He leaned back, crossing his arms, entirely satisfied with his monologue. He believed he had just financially executed me. He believed that by securing a highly leveraged loan through his shadow holding company, he had proven his absolute financial dominance. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. As a high-level forensic wealth manager, my entire career was dedicated to dismantling complex corporate structures and exposing hidden liabilities. I knew every single vulnerability in Andre's financial portfolio because I was the one who used to quietly fix them. I knew that Apex Luxury Holdings was a fragile house of cards, propped up by short-term, extremely high-interest mezzanine debt. I knew that by taking out this massive new loan to pay me off and simultaneously fund his lavish $500,000 wedding to Jasmine, he had just pushed his debt-to-income ratio past the point of no return. He had completely over-leveraged his final remaining asset. If I fought him for more money today, we would be legally forced to enter a formal financial discovery phase. A forensic audit would immediately reveal the terminal state of his accounts, forcing him to restructure his loans or declare bankruptcy before the divorce was even finalized. I could not allow that to happen. I needed him to remain completely blind to his own impending ruin. I needed him to walk out of this room believing he was an invincible titan of industry. I looked down at the crisp white envelope resting against my fingers. I picked it up, opened the flap, and verified the cashier's check for $250,000. It was printed with the logo of his secondary commercial lender, a firm known for predatory interest rates. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I did not throw the check back in his face or scream about the years I had wasted supporting his dreams. I calmly reached into my leather tote bag, pulled out my pen, and signed the final divorce decree on the dotted line. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. "Thank you, Andre," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly polite. "I wish you exactly the future you deserve." Andre let out a loud, mocking laugh, turning to high-five his attorney. Kendra openly rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath, and went back to furiously texting her friends. I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my charcoal suit, and walked out of the heavy oak doors without a single backward glance. I walked down the long corridor, stepped into the elevator, and rode it down to the lobby in total silence. I did not wait to reach my car. The second my heels hit the sun-baked pavement outside the glass high-rise, the facade of the broken wife completely vanished. I pulled my encrypted cell phone from my bag. I bypassed my standard local contacts and dialed a direct international line. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. It was my offshore corporate broker based in the Cayman Islands. "The capital has been secured," I said, stepping into the shade of the building, my eyes scanning the busy Atlanta traffic moving down the street. "I am wiring $250,000 into the Shell account within the hour." "Understood," my broker replied. "And the directive for the newly deposited funds?" I allowed a slow, dangerous smile to finally break across my face. Andre had wanted to play a game of financial leverage, completely unaware that he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him. He thought he was buying his freedom, but he had just financed his own execution. "Use the entire amount," I instructed, my voice hard and absolute. "I want you to aggressively purchase the majority debt of Apex Luxury Holdings. Buy out their primary creditors. Pay whatever premium is necessary, but I want the commercial paper on that holding company in my hands by the end of the week. Do not leave a single paper trail connecting the purchase back to me. Consider it done," the broker confirmed before disconnecting the line. I slipped the phone back into my bag and took a deep breath of the warm city air. By the time Andre walked down the aisle to marry his mistress, I would not just be his ex-wife. I would secretly be his sole creditor, and I fully intended to collect every single cent he owed me. To the outside world, and certainly to my deluded ex-husband, an accountant is just a human calculator. Andre always believed my job was simply to balance ledgers and file tax returns. He never understood what a high-level forensic wealth manager actually does. I did not just count money. I tracked its ghosts. I dismantled complex corporate structures designed to hide massive liabilities. I analyzed the financial blood flow of shell companies' offshore accounts and highly leveraged portfolios. I tracked wire transfers through labyrinthine networks of global banking systems to expose corporate fraud. I was an apex predator in a world of numbers, and Andre's entire existence was nothing but financial rot wrapped in bespoke tailoring. When he first launched Apex Luxury Holdings, I was the one who quietly structured the initial limited liability companies. I built the foundation. I knew his exact operating model because I had repeatedly warned him against using it. His strategy was built entirely on fragile ego rather than solid equity. To fund his illusion of being Atlanta's premier luxury real estate mogul, Andre relied exclusively on short-term, high-yield mezzanine debt. This is the kind of toxic predatory financing that legitimate developers only use as a desperate last resort. He was taking out massive high-interest loans to acquire flashy commercial properties, banking entirely on flipping them or securing massive anchor tenants before the balloon payments came due. But Andre did not have the discipline, the patience, or the business acumen to wait for actual returns. He was treating his corporate holding company like a personal ATM. He was illegally commingling funds, siphoning capital from the business operating accounts to fund his extravagant personal lifestyle. The custom crimson suits, the heavily leased Range Rovers, the thousands of dollars spent on dinners at exclusive country clubs. To impress people who did not care about him, it was all being paid for by borrowing against properties he did not truly own. His holding company was a ticking time bomb of structured debt. The balloon payment's massive lump sum demands for the principal loan amounts were scheduled to detonate in a cascading sequence over the next 90 days. The primary creditors, a syndicate of aggressive private lenders, were already growing highly anxious. They knew Apex Luxury Holdings was over-leveraged, but they did not know exactly how close Andre was to total irrecoverable insolvency. I did. I had mapped his entire financial ecosystem. I had memorized his debt-to-income ratio down to the final decimal point. I knew exactly which structural pillar to kick to bring the entire mansion crashing down on his head. Within 48 hours of walking out of that freezing mediation room, my offshore broker in the Cayman Islands executed the first phase of my precise directive. The $250,000 cashier's check Andre had so smugly slid across the mahogany table was the very instrument I used to fund his destruction. It served as the initial capital injection for a newly formed, completely anonymous offshore entity, Obsidian Capital Management, LLC. Operating behind layers of ironclad corporate secrecy and encrypted communications, I instructed my broker to aggressively approach Andre's primary creditors. I knew these private lenders. They were ruthless, but above all, they were pragmatists who hated risk. They recognized that Andre's real estate portfolio was highly distressed. If he defaulted, and he inevitably would, they would be tied up in messy, protracted litigation, trying to seize commercial properties that were heavily encumbered by secondary liens and unpaid contractor invoices. Obsidian Capital Management offered them a clean, immediate, and highly lucrative exit. Through my broker, I proposed to purchase the majority debt of Apex Luxury Holdings out from under them. I used my deep industry connections, leveraging long-standing favors from former colleagues in the commercial banking sector, to grease the bureaucratic wheels and expedite the transfer of the commercial paper. I offered a slight premium above the current distressed market value. It was an offer designed to prevent them from asking questions, ensuring the transaction would close swiftly and absolutely silently. The creditors were overwhelmingly thrilled to offload the toxic debt. Within days, they signed over the promissory notes, the deeds of trust, and the personal guarantees Andre had foolishly signed. The sheer blinding arrogance of my ex-husband made the acquisition almost embarrassingly easy. He had been so eager to protect his public image and finalize our divorce that he had signed personal guarantees on his most recent business loans, legally tying his personal assets, including the Buckhead estate, directly to the corporate debt. He genuinely believed that securing my equity buyout loan through his holding company was a masterstroke of financial dominance. In reality, he had gathered all of his liabilities, bundled them into one neat, highly combustible package, and willingly handed me the match. By the end of the week, the transaction was complete. The digital ink on the transfer agreements was dry. The commercial paper was securely vaulted under the registered name of Obsidian Capital Management. There was absolutely no paper trail leading back to me. To the public eye and to the mocking gossip circles of Vivian and Kendra Zara, the boring accountant was quietly packing up her life and fading into obscurity. To the elite financial sector, a faceless offshore firm had just acquired a lucrative portfolio of high-risk commercial debt. 30 days later, the final divorce decree arrived in my encrypted email inbox. It was a crisp, legally binding PDF bearing the official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I sat at the sleek glass desk in my new minimalist downtown loft and scrolled through the document verifying every single clause. The legal separation was absolute and irrevocable. The court formally recognized that I had accepted the $250,000 buyout. All legal and financial ties to the Buckhead estate, the corporate car leases, and the Apex Luxury Holdings operating accounts were officially severed from my name and my pristine credit history. I was completely clean. I carried zero liability for the massive financial sinkhole Andre was currently standing in. I had built an impenetrable firewall around my own assets. My phone buzzed loudly against the glass desk. It was an alert from a popular local Atlanta society blog. The headline featured a glossy professional photograph of Andre and Jasmine standing in front of a lavish, newly acquired commercial property. Jasmine was wearing a massive diamond engagement ring, smiling triumphantly for the cameras. The article detailed their upcoming $500,000 wedding, raving about Andre's visionary success and his beautiful, sophisticated new fiancée. I scrolled past photos of Vivian and Kendra in the comments boasting about the elite guest list and the sheer opulence of the impending celebration. The piece was filled with arrogant quotes from Andre bragging about his latest acquisitions and his untouchable status among the city's wealthy elite. He was spending liquid cash he absolutely did not have, charging headfirst into a lavish lifestyle funded entirely by the very debt I now owned. He was throwing a royal coronation on the main deck of a rapidly sinking ship. I closed the article and opened my secure financial terminal. I pulled up the master ledger for Obsidian Capital Management. The digital numbers glowed stark white against the dark screen, a beautiful, undeniable testament to my leverage. I owned the massive balloon mortgage on the Buckhead estate. I owned the high-interest notes on his commercial properties. I owned the predatory debt on the shadow holding company he was currently using to finance his extravagant wedding. My legal break from the marriage was the final safeguard. I had successfully insulated myself from the blast radius. Now I held the detonator to Andre's entire financial existence safely in the palm of my hand. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet, leaned back in my chair, and waited for the first payment to come due. Exactly 72 hours after securing the commercial paper for Apex Luxury Holdings through my offshore broker, I boarded a first-class flight out of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I did not look out the window as the plane ascended through the heavy Georgia clouds. I had absolutely zero nostalgia left for Atlanta. The city had become a suffocating monument to Andre's fragile vanity and Vivian's toxic social climbing. I had already orchestrated the ultimate financial trap. Now I needed physical distance to let the fuse burn down in absolute peace. My corporate firm, a global leader in wealth management and forensic auditing, had been aggressively courting me to take over their European division for over a year. I had previously declined the promotion, shackled by Andre's relentless insistence that moving away from his primary real estate market would somehow sabotage his local brand. Without his dead weight anchoring me to a fabricated reality, I accepted the transfer to Paris instantly. The relocation package was staggering, complete with a comprehensive housing stipend, a massive salary increase, and an elite team of senior analysts operating under my direct command. I was finally stepping into the professional power I had earned. I settled into a sprawling top-floor houseman apartment in the prestigious 8th arrondissement. It was everything the Buckhead estate was not. There were no gaudy chandeliers, no cheap faux marble imported solely to impress people we inherently disliked, and absolutely no crushing balloon mortgages hanging over the deed. My new life was defined by quiet, unshakable stability. The apartment featured original herringbone oak floors, towering windows overlooking the Seine, and a curated collection of genuine modern art. I filled the expansive space with silence and success. Silence was a luxury I had been entirely deprived of while managing Andre's chaotic life. My days were spent dissecting the financial portfolios of European billionaires, identifying tax liabilities, and structuring ironclad wealth preservation strategies for multinational conglomerates. I was operating at the absolute peak of my industry, respected and feared by executives who held genuine power. I walked the cobblestone streets of Paris wearing tailored Saint Laurent coats and vintage Cartier watches, exuding a quiet, authentic wealth that did not require a public audience. I no longer spent my evenings sitting at a kitchen island frantically untangling my husband's catastrophic credit card statements to prevent defaults. Instead, I spent them drinking espresso on my wrought iron balcony, watching the city lights completely untethered from the circus I had left behind. However, the circus desperately wanted me to keep watching the show. I had blocked Andre, Jasmine, Vivian, and Kendra on every conceivable communication platform before my flight even touched down in France. I severed their access to my peace with surgical precision. But Kendra, fueled by a toxic mixture of familial arrogance and deep-seated insecurity, absolutely refused to let me fade into the background. She was utterly obsessed with proving that my departure was a tragic defeat, a narrative she needed to believe to validate her own hollow existence. Since she could not reach my personal accounts, Kendra began creating a relentless stream of burner profiles. Every few days, a new faceless account would slip past my privacy filters, sending direct messages loaded with links to Andre and Jasmine's public social media pages. Kendra was aggressively curating a digital museum of their supposed triumph, force-feeding me the highlight reel of their fabricated fairy tale. She operated under the delusion that I was sitting in Europe weeping over the loss of a man I had intentionally discarded. I would sit at my Parisian desk sipping a perfectly pressed cortado and objectively analyze the digital debris she sent me. There were highly filtered photos of Andre and Jasmine touring luxury car dealerships, posing triumphantly in front of vehicles they were undoubtedly leasing at predatory interest rates. There were videos of Vivian hosting lavish engagement luncheons at her country club, her fake pearls gleaming as she paraded Jasmine around to her wealthy friends, boasting about the elite bloodline they were establishing. Kendra sent me an entire gallery of their wedding preparations. Jasmine trying on a $40,000 custom designer gown. Andre securing a 500-person guest list at one of Atlanta's most expensive and historic venues. They were pouring gasoline on their own financial funeral pyre, aggressively documenting every single dollar they did not actually have. Kendra's accompanying messages were dripping with venom. She would type long, gloating paragraphs about how quickly Andre had upgraded his life, how much better Jasmine fit into their high society circle, and how pathetic I must feel sitting alone in a foreign country while they conquered Atlanta. She wanted me to feel replaced. She wanted me to feel small. She desperately needed me to be the devastated, abandoned ex-wife, mourning the loss of a king. She had absolutely no concept of the reality operating beneath the surface. Every time Kendra sent me a photo of Andre boasting about a new commercial acquisition, I simply logged into the Obsidian Capital Management Terminal and watched his corporate debt load increase in real time. I was not looking at a triumphant ex-husband. I was looking at my highest-yielding financial asset. Every smile, every clinking champagne glass, every boastful caption was legally subsidized by the high-interest commercial paper sitting securely in my offshore vault. I did not feel jealous. I felt the cold, calculating satisfaction of an auditor watching a target willingly step into a steel trap. He was spending my money to fund his illusion, and the contractual penalties for his inevitable default were astronomically high. As a forensic wealth manager, I had intentionally structured the debt acquisition through Obsidian Capital Management to include accelerated default clauses. The second Andre missed a single balloon payment on his commercial loans, my offshore firm gained the immediate legal right to seize the collateral. That collateral included his corporate operating accounts, his luxury vehicle leases, and the deed to the Buckhead estate he prized so highly. I was not just going to bankrupt him, I was going to legally repossess his entire identity. I ignored the burner accounts, letting Kendra scream into the digital void. I never gave her the satisfaction of a response, a block, or even a read receipt. I simply let the evidence of their spending accumulate, checking off the days on the calendar, until the first massive balloon payment was scheduled to detonate. I knew exactly how long his liquid capital would last before the entire structure imploded. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in Paris. I was sitting in my home office drafting a complex risk assessment report for a Swiss shipping conglomerate when my personal phone lit up with a notification. It was not another faceless burner account originating from Atlanta. It was a direct message on a highly secure professional networking platform completely bypassing the social media filters Kendra had been exploiting. I picked up the device and stared at the name glowing on the high-resolution screen. The message was from Greg. Greg was Kendra's husband. He was a quiet, intensely analytical white man who worked as a senior risk assessor in corporate banking. Throughout my entire marriage to Andre, Greg had always been the silent observer in the room. He rarely participated in Vivian's elitist posturing or Andre's loud bragging. He usually sat in the corner during their chaotic family dinners, nursing a scotch and watching the delusions unfold with a deeply exhausted expression. He was the only other person in that family who actually understood how money worked. We had never been particularly close, but we had always shared a quiet, unspoken mutual respect. It was the silent solidarity of two highly educated financial professionals who knew they were surrounded by absolute illiterates. Greg knew the difference between leveraged debt and actual wealth, and I had always suspected he stayed married to Kendra out of sheer habit rather than genuine compatibility. I tapped the notification opening the secure message. It was short, precise, and entirely devoid of the toxic emotional drama his wife thrived on. It read like an internal banking memo. Zara. I hope Paris is treating you well. I apologize for reaching out this way, but I needed a secure channel. I have been running some internal audits at my firm regarding local commercial debt exposure in the real estate sector. I am looking at the ledgers for Apex Luxury Holdings. I know exactly what Andre is doing. More importantly, I know exactly what you just did. We need to talk before the wedding. I stared at the glowing text on my secure professional networking terminal. Greg was not a man prone to hyperbole or dramatic flair. If he was reaching out through encrypted corporate channels, the situation inside the Atlanta bubble had reached a critical mass of instability. I set my espresso down on the marble coaster and adjusted my posture, my forensic mind instantly shifting into high gear. I typed a rapid, precise response, bypassing any superficial pleasantries. Greg, my direct offshore line is attached below. Call me now. Less than 30 seconds later, my encrypted phone buzzed. I answered on the first ring, listening to the heavy silence on the other end, before Greg finally let out a long, exhausted sigh. Zara? Greg said, his voice thick with the kind of profound fatigue that only comes from being surrounded by relentless stupidity. I need to apologize to you first. Kendra has lost her absolute mind. I caught her creating another batch of fake accounts this morning just to harass you with wedding updates. I took her phone and locked her out of the home network, but she is completely manic. She is entirely convinced that sending you pictures of Andre's new cars will somehow validate her own miserable existence. You do not need to apologize for your wife's insecurities, Greg, I replied, my tone perfectly level. I muted her noise weeks ago. I am far more interested in what you found in the commercial ledgers. It is a total bloodbath, Greg stated, the professional detachment returning to his voice. I ran a stress test on our local commercial real estate sector for Q3. Apex Luxury Holdings popped up as a massive red flag. Andre is completely out of his depth. He is bleeding capital like a severed artery. He just took out another predatory bridge loan to fund this wedding to Jasmine. Zara, the budget for this circus is pushing $500,000. He is booking a historic downtown venue, flying in exotic orchids from Thailand, and securing a fleet of vintage Rolls-Royces just for the bridal procession. I listened as the sheer magnitude of Andre's hubris echoed through the secure connection. $500,000 for a wedding. He was essentially setting fire to a mountain of cash he did not possess, simply to prove a point to a city that did not actually care about him. It gets worse. Greg continued, his voice dropping an octave as if he feared someone might overhear him. Vivian is encouraging it. She just convinced him to hire a celebrity event planner whose base fee alone is equivalent to a down payment on a commercial high-rise. The entire family is spiraling into massive unrecoverable debt just to maintain this pathetic illusion of elite wealth. Andre genuinely believes that throwing the wedding of the decade will attract premier investors. He thinks projecting extreme wealth will miraculously generate extreme wealth. It is a textbook case of financial psychosis. "And you know who holds the paper on that bridge loan?" I prompted softly. "I traced the routing numbers through the offshore clearinghouse," Greg said, a hint of dark amusement slipping into his usually stoic demeanor. "Obsidian Capital Management. You bought the debt. You own the entire house of cards, Zara. When his balloon payments hit next week, you have the legal authority to trigger a catastrophic default. You can seize the real estate, the business accounts, the cars, everything. You are going to vaporize him." "I am simply managing my assets, Greg," I responded, my voice coated in ice. "He handed me the leverage. I just chose to exercise it." "I am not trying to stop you," Greg clarified instantly. "Frankly, watching this family of narcissists face an actual consequence is the only thing keeping me sane right now. I just needed you to know that the timeline is accelerating. He is draining the corporate operating accounts to pay the wedding vendors in cash because his credit lines are entirely tapped out. He has completely hollowed out the foundation." "I will verify the exposure on my end," I said. "Thank you for the transparency, Greg. You are the only person in that entire genetic line with a shred of actual intelligence." "Take him down, Zara," Greg said softly before the line went dead. I set the phone down and immediately spun around to my multi-monitor workstation. The rain outside my Parisian window beat a steady rhythm against the glass as I brought up the secure Obsidian Capital dashboard. I needed to cross-reference Greg's intelligence with the raw, unfiltered data flowing from Andre's accounts. I bypassed the standard banking portals and utilized my high-level administrative clearance to access the transaction ledgers for Apex Luxury Holdings. The numbers scrolling across the black screen were nothing short of spectacular. Greg had not exaggerated. If anything, he had undersold the severity of the financial hemorrhage. I tracked the outgoing wire transfers from the past 14 days. $50,000 routed to a luxury bridal boutique in Milan for Jasmine's custom gown. $75,000 wired to a high-end catering syndicate. A non-refundable deposit of $100,000 locked into the historic venue. Andre was illegally diverting operating capital from his commercial real estate holding company to pay for personal entertainment expenses. He was systematically draining the exact accounts that served as the primary collateral for the massive loans I currently owned. My forensic eye analyzed the cash flow velocity. At his current rate of expenditure, Apex Luxury Holdings would possess zero liquid capital in exactly 9 days. He was entirely exposed. The structural integrity of his entire fake empire was resting on a single fragile toothpick. When the multi-million-dollar balloon payment came due, he would open his corporate accounts and find absolute zero. There would be no safety net, no extension, no leniency. He had essentially financed his own elaborate execution, broadcasting the entire process on social media for the world to see. He wanted an audience for his greatness. I was going to ensure he had an audience for his destruction. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Greg back. He answered almost immediately, the background noise indicating he was now in his car. "The data confirms your assessment." I stated, my tone sharp and strictly professional. "The holding company is critically exposed. The cash reserves are effectively non-existent. The implosion is mathematically guaranteed." "It is a suicide mission," Greg agreed. "They are picking out ice sculptures while the ship is underwater." "I have one final question for you," I said, leaning back in my leather chair, my eyes fixed on the beautiful, damning numbers illuminating my screens. "The wedding is scheduled for next Saturday. You work as a senior risk assessor for Vanguard Commercial Bank. Are you attending the ceremony alongside your firm's managing director, Mr. Arthur Sterling?" Greg paused. The silence on the line crackled with sudden realization. Arthur Sterling was not just a managing director, he was the most notoriously conservative, ruthless commercial banking titan in the Southeast. He despised flashy displays of wealth, and he demanded absolute financial transparency from anyone attempting to enter his elite circle. Andre had spent 2 years desperately trying to court Sterling for a massive downtown development project, viewing his approval as the ultimate validation of his fake mogul status. "Yes," Greg confirmed, his voice dropping into a hushed, incredulous tone. "Arthur is attending." Andre practically begged him to come. He sent a personalized courier with a bottle of $2,000 champagne just to deliver the invitation. Arthur accepted strictly out of morbid curiosity. He wants to see exactly what kind of developer throws a $500,000 party in this economy. "Perfect," I replied, a cold thrill of absolute triumph surging through my veins. "I appreciate the confirmation. Enjoy the wedding, Greg. I suggest you wear a very nice suit. It is going to be a highly memorable event." "Zara, what are you doing?" Greg asked, a mixture of awe and genuine fear evident in his voice. "I am doing my job," I said. "I am balancing the ledger." I ended the call without another word. I placed the phone gently onto the desk and smiled. The trap was set. The audience was confirmed. The most powerful man in Atlanta commercial real estate was going to be sitting in the front row. I turned my attention back to the glowing workstation, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I opened a fresh encrypted window and began drafting the legal asset seizure documents. The time for silent observation had officially expired. It was time to pull the trigger. 48 hours before Jasmine was scheduled to walk down an aisle blanketed in imported white orchids, the digital clock on my Paris workstation struck midnight Eastern Standard Time. I sat in the quiet elegance of my Haussmann apartment, the faint hum of the city traffic drifting up from the street below. In front of me, the encrypted dashboard for Obsidian Capital Management illuminated the dark room with a stark, undeniable truth. The deadline for the massive balloon payment on the primary commercial note held by Apex Luxury Holdings had officially expired. The digital ledger remained entirely unchanged. There was no incoming wire transfer. There was no clearinghouse notification. The balance on the account sat at a devastating absolute zero. As I mathematically predicted based on my forensic mapping of his financial ecosystem, Andre had drained every single drop of his liquid capital to fund his spectacular illusion. He had diverted the exact funds required to service his corporate debt, to pay for bespoke wedding attire, celebrity event planners, and a fleet of leased luxury vehicles. In the high-stakes world of commercial real estate finance, a missed balloon payment is not treated as a minor administrative oversight. It is a catastrophic breach of contract. The mezzanine debt structure I had acquired was ruthlessly specific. It contained an ironclad cross-default provision. This meant that by failing to satisfy this single primary obligation, Andre was now legally in default on his entire portfolio. The protective walls around his shadow holding company instantly dissolved. I watched the automated sequence initiate on my screen. The internal banking software flagged the Apex Luxury Holdings account in glaring red. The system officially registered the default, instantly calculating the astronomical late fees and penalty interest rates that began accruing by the second. The trap I had so carefully constructed had just snapped shut, and my ex-husband had willingly stepped directly onto the pressure plate. He was no longer the undisputed king of Atlanta luxury real estate. Legally and financially, he was completely insolvent. Within 4 hours of the missed deadline, the encrypted inbox for Obsidian Capital Management registered its first incoming message. It was exactly 4:15 a.m. in Atlanta. The timing indicated that Andre had not slept. He must have received the automated default notification from his banking portal and immediately roused his legal counsel. The email was sent by a senior partner at the boutique corporate law firm Andre kept on retainer. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the text with clinical detachment. Urgent. Notice of wire delay. Apex Luxury Holdings. To the managing directors of Obsidian Capital Management, please be advised that the wire transfer scheduled for midnight tonight regarding the primary commercial note for Apex Luxury Holdings has been temporarily delayed due to an internal administrative routing error. Our client possesses the full capital required to satisfy the balloon payment and is currently working with his local banking representatives to expedite the release of funds. We formally request a standard 72-hour grace period to rectify this minor technical oversight, without triggering default penalties. We appreciate your immediate confirmation of this extension. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a cold, genuine amusement wash over me. It was a perfectly crafted legal lie. There was no administrative routing error. There was no glitch in the banking software. I had direct backdoor access to the actual balance of the Apex Luxury Holdings operating accounts because I was the forensic architect who had originally structured them. I knew his accounts were completely hollowed out. Andre had forced his high-priced lawyer to draft an arrogant, dismissive email to an offshore holding company, completely unaware that he was lying directly to the very woman who used to balance those exact ledgers. He was attempting to exert dominance over a faceless corporate entity, banking on the assumption that Obsidian Capital was just another bureaucratic hedge fund that would automatically grant a standard grace period to avoid paperwork. I closed the email. I did not type a response. I did not acknowledge receipt. I simply let the silence stretch out, allowing the reality of the situation to slowly suffocate them. 2 hours later, the inbox registered a second message. The tone had shifted significantly. The polished corporate arrogance was gone, replaced by a thin veneer of escalating panic. Second notice. Request for immediate forbearance. Apex Luxury Holdings, to the managing directors. We have not received a response to our previous communication. We must stress the urgency of this matter. Our client is currently experiencing a temporary liquidity bottleneck due to unexpected high-level personal expenditures finalizing a major life event this weekend. He is in the process of liquidating secondary assets to cover the outstanding balance. Our client is willing to offer a premium penalty payment of 5% above the standard contract rate in exchange for an immediate signed forbearance agreement, freezing all default actions until Monday morning. Please contact this office immediately. I leaned back in my chair and analyzed the text. A temporary liquidity bottleneck due to unexpected personal expenditures. That was the legal translation for blowing $500,000 on a wedding you could not afford. Andre was literally begging for time, offering to pay exorbitant penalty fees to delay the inevitable. He was trying to push the financial detonation past the weekend so he could successfully parade his fake wealth in front of Arthur Sterling and the rest of the Atlanta elite without his commercial properties being actively seized. He wanted to secure the validation of the city's top investors before the bank took the very venues he was using to impress them. It was the ultimate manifestation of the golden child's hubris. He genuinely believed he could outsmart the math. He believed his charisma, his custom crimson suits, and his carefully curated social media presence could somehow override a legally binding commercial debt contract. A third email arrived exactly 1 hour later. It was no longer sent by the legal counsel. The sender was Andre himself, utilizing his direct corporate address. Attention Obsidian Capital Management Portfolio Manager. This is Andre Bennett, CEO of Apex Luxury Holdings. I need someone on the phone right now. I have millions of dollars tied up in downtown development projects and a flawless reputation in this city. You are holding a predatory note that I acquired from a secondary syndicate. I demand a grace period through the weekend. I am hosting a major networking event with the top-tier investors in this state, and I will have your capital by Monday. Do not trigger the default cascade. You will jeopardize massive future returns. Call my direct line immediately. The sheer blinding entitlement radiating from the screen was breathtaking. He was defaulting on a massive loan, yet he was still attempting to issue demands. He was trying to leverage a wedding guest list to negotiate corporate debt relief. He was frantically trying to plug a massive hole in the hull of his sinking ship by shouting at the ocean. I highlighted all 3 emails and archived them into a secure digital vault. They were perfect documented evidence of his insolvency. I ignored his desperate demands for a phone call. I would not give him the comfort of human interaction. I would not give him a voice to negotiate with. I remained the silent, faceless offshore entity slowly tightening the noose around his throat. I opened a new, highly secure document folder on my workstation. It was time to execute the final phase of my directive. I drafted the formal notice of default. I input the exact legal codes, the routing numbers, and the precise contract clauses that authorized immediate asset seizure. I prepared the uniform commercial code filings required to legally freeze all of Apex Luxury Holdings' operating accounts. I drafted the directives that would be routed directly to the commercial banking institutions in Atlanta, legally barring Andre from withdrawing or transferring a single dime of corporate funds. Finally, I prepared the documents authorizing the repossession of the physical collateral, the commercial real estate deeds, the corporate vehicle leases, the massive, heavily leveraged Buckhead estate that he was currently using to host his pre-wedding VIP receptions. Every single keystroke was a masterclass in forensic precision. I was systematically dismantling his entire existence from a desk 4,000 miles away. I was turning his fabricated reality into dust. I reviewed the final legal packets. The digital signatures were verified. The routing codes for the Atlanta commercial courts were locked in. The asset freeze directives were perfectly calibrated to bypass any local judicial delays. The documentation was flawless, impenetrable, and absolutely lethal. I did not press send, not yet. Timing in forensic wealth management is everything. Triggering the asset freeze now would allow Andre 48 hours to panic to potentially secure a predatory payday loan or to spin a narrative of corporate victimization to his powerful wedding guests. I was not going to afford him that luxury. I was not going to let him control the narrative. I wanted him to stand at the altar. I wanted him to look Arthur Sterling directly in the eye, believing he had successfully pulled off the ultimate deception. I wanted him to experience the absolute pinnacle of his fabricated triumph before the floor completely collapsed beneath his feet. I scheduled the digital delivery of the foreclosure documents, the asset freezes, and the notice of default to execute on a delayed timer. The system would automatically route the devastating legal packets to his lawyers, his bankers, and his personal email inbox exactly 48 hours from now. They would detonate precisely as the wedding reception reached its peak. I closed the encrypted terminal. I walked over to the towering windows of my Parisian apartment and looked out over the glowing city skyline. I poured myself a final espresso, listening to the rain, waiting for the weekend to arrive. The digital clock on my Parisian workstation glowed stark white against the dark mahogany of my desk, marking the exact minute the grace period expired. It was exactly 48 hours before Jasmine was scheduled to walk down an aisle blanketed in imported out-of-season white orchids. I sat in the quiet, climate-controlled elegance of my home office, the faint, sophisticated hum of the city traffic drifting up from the avenue below. On my primary monitor, the encrypted dashboard for Obsidian Capital Management displayed a truth that no amount of Atlanta social posturing could erase. The deadline for the massive balloon payment on the primary commercial note held by Apex Luxury Holdings had officially and irrevocably passed. The digital ledger remained entirely unchanged. There was no incoming wire transfer. There was no automated clearinghouse notification. The balance on the account sat at a devastating absolute zero. Just as I had mathematically predicted based on my extensive forensic mapping of his financial ecosystem, Andre had drained every single drop of his liquid capital to fund his spectacular illusion. He had illegally diverted the exact funds required to service his corporate debt, using that restricted capital to pay for bespoke wedding attire, celebrity event planners, and a fleet of leased luxury vehicles. In the high-stakes world of commercial real estate finance, a missed balloon payment is not treated as a minor administrative oversight or a simple clerical error. It is a catastrophic breach of contract. The mezzanine debt structure I had acquired through my offshore broker was ruthlessly specific. It contained an ironclad cross-default provision. This meant that by failing to satisfy this single primary obligation, Andre was now legally in default on his entire financial portfolio. The protective legal walls around his shadow holding company instantly dissolved. I watched the automated sequence initiate on my screen. The internal banking software flagged the Apex Luxury Holdings master account in glaring red. The system officially registered the default, instantly calculating the astronomical late fees and penalty interest rates that began accruing by the second. The trap I had so carefully constructed had just snapped shut, and my ex-husband had willingly stepped directly onto the pressure plate. He was no longer the undisputed king of Atlanta luxury real estate. Legally and financially, he was completely insolvent. Within 4 hours of the missed deadline, the encrypted inbox for Obsidian Capital Management registered its first incoming message. It was exactly 4:15 in the morning in Atlanta. The timing indicated that Andre had not slept. He must have received the automated default notification from his banking portal and immediately roused his legal counsel in a blind panic. The email was sent by a senior partner at the boutique corporate law firm Andre kept on an exorbitant monthly retainer. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the text with clinical detachment. The lawyer formally advised the managing directors of Obsidian Capital Management that the scheduled wire transfer had been temporarily delayed due to an internal administrative routing error. The email claimed that their client possessed the full capital required to satisfy the balloon payment and was currently working with local banking representatives to expedite the release of funds. They formally requested a standard 72-hour grace period to rectify this minor technical oversight without triggering default penalties, pressing for immediate confirmation of the extension. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a cold, genuine amusement wash over me. It was a perfectly crafted legal lie. There was no administrative routing error. There was no glitch in the banking software. I had direct backdoor access to the actual balance of the Apex Luxury Holdings operating accounts because I was the forensic architect who had originally structured them. I knew his accounts were completely hollowed out. Andre had forced his high-priced lawyer to draft an arrogant, dismissive email to an offshore holding company, completely unaware that he was lying directly to the very woman who used to balance those exact ledgers. He was attempting to exert dominance over a faceless corporate entity, banking on the assumption that Obsidian Capital was just another bureaucratic hedge fund that would automatically grant a standard grace period just to avoid the hassle of foreclosure paperwork. I closed the email. I did not type a response. I did not acknowledge receipt. I simply let the silence stretch out across the Atlantic Ocean, allowing the reality of the situation to slowly suffocate them. 2 hours later, the inbox registered a second message. The tone had shifted significantly. The polished corporate arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a thin veneer of escalating panic. The lawyers stated they had not received a response to their previous communication and stressed the absolute urgency of the matter. They admitted their client was currently experiencing a temporary liquidity bottleneck due to unexpected high-level personal expenditures, finalizing a major life event this weekend. The email stated Andre was in the process of liquidating secondary assets to cover the outstanding balance and offered a premium penalty payment of 5% above the standard contract rate in exchange for an immediate signed forbearance agreement, freezing all default actions until Monday morning. A temporary liquidity bottleneck due to unexpected personal expenditures. That was the legal translation for blowing $500,000 on a wedding you could not afford. Andre was literally begging for time, offering to pay exorbitant penalty fees to delay the inevitable. He was trying to push the financial detonation past the weekend so he could successfully parade his fake wealth in front of Arthur Sterling and the rest of the Atlanta elite without his commercial properties being actively seized. He wanted to secure the validation of the city's top investors before the bank took the very venues he was using to impress them. It was the ultimate manifestation of the golden child's hubris. He genuinely believed he could outsmart the math. He believed his charisma, his custom crimson suits, and his carefully curated social media presence could somehow override a legally binding commercial debt contract. A third email arrived exactly 1 hour later. It was no longer sent by the legal counsel. The sender was Andre himself, utilizing his direct corporate address. He demanded someone get on the phone immediately, boasting about his millions of dollars tied up in downtown development projects and his flawless reputation in the city. He aggressively commanded a grace period through the weekend, stating he was hosting a major networking event with the top-tier investors in the state and promised to have the capital by Monday. He explicitly warned the offshore firm not to trigger the default cascade, threatening that we would jeopardize massive future returns. The sheer blinding entitlement radiating from the screen was breathtaking. He was defaulting on a massive commercial loan, yet he was still attempting to issue aggressive demands. He was trying to leverage a wedding guest list to negotiate corporate debt relief. He was frantically trying to plug a massive hole in the hull of his sinking ship by shouting at the ocean. I highlighted all 3 emails and archived them into a secure digital vault. They were perfect documented evidence of his insolvency. I ignored his desperate demands for a phone call. I would not give him the comfort of human interaction. I would not give him a voice to negotiate with. I remained the silent, faceless offshore entity slowly tightening the noose around his throat. I opened a new highly secure document folder on my workstation and initiated a video conference with my stateside legal counsel in New York. It was time to execute the final phase of my directive. I walked my lead attorney through the uniform commercial code filings, the cross-default triggers, and the immediate seizure protocols. My legal team reviewed the ledgers and confirmed the breach was absolute. Andre had not just missed the payment. His frantic liquidation of secondary assets to pay wedding vendors constituted a fraudulent conveyance under the terms of the mezzanine debt. The attorneys suggested an immediate total asset freeze. I instructed them to wait. If we froze the accounts on a Thursday, Andre would have 2 full business days to panic. He would call his lawyers, he would leverage his remaining social capital to secure a predatory bridge loan, or worse, he would cancel the extravagant wedding and play the victim. He would spin a narrative of a hostile corporate takeover to save his reputation. I needed his reputation destroyed in front of the very people he was trying to impress. I needed the implosion to happen when the banks were closed, when his lawyers were entirely unreachable, and when he was physically trapped in a room with Arthur Sterling and the rest of Atlanta's commercial elite. We shifted from immediate execution to a delayed, automated strike. I utilized a specialized banking protocol designed for high-frequency trading and synchronized asset management. I linked the UCC foreclosure filings, the bank account garnishments, and the real estate seizure notices to a centralized digital chronometer. I programmed the banking algorithms to initiate a hard lock on every single account associated with Apex Luxury Holdings. This was not a simple freeze, it was an irrevocable digital barricade. Every corporate credit card, every vendor credit line, and every business checking account would simultaneously return a hard decline code. I did not stop at the liquid accounts. The mezzanine debt contract allowed for the immediate repossession of physical collateral in the event of a default. I automated the electronic delivery of the foreclosure notices. These would be dispatched simultaneously via certified digital courier to the Fulton County Records Office, to Andre's personal legal team, and directly to the property managers of his highly leveraged commercial buildings. The sleek leased Range Rovers he and Jasmine had been parading around town were legally registered to the holding company. I routed the repossession orders to the premier luxury auto recovery firm in Atlanta, ensuring the seizure warrants went live concurrently with the banking locks. Then there was the crown jewel of Andre's fabricated empire, the Buckhead estate, the property he had foolishly cross-collateralized to secure the buyout money for my divorce settlement. He was currently using that mansion to host the bridal party, the groomsmen, and the out-of-town VIPs. I queued the formal eviction and seizure notice for that property, ensuring the digital delivery was scheduled to hit his personal inbox and the inbox of his estate manager simultaneously. I was dismantling his corporate identity, his personal wealth, and his physical shelter in one synchronized digital strike. I sat back and looked at the master chronometer on my terminal. I had to select the exact moment of execution. I pulled up the lavish embossed digital wedding itinerary Kendra had so helpfully forwarded to me from one of her burner accounts weeks prior. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon at a historic cathedral downtown. That was just the prologue. The actual display of wealth, the million-dollar spectacle designed to court Arthur Sterling and the commercial banking syndicate, was the reception. According to the itinerary, the cocktail hour would conclude at exactly 3:45. At 4 o'clock, the massive oak doors of the ballroom were scheduled to swing open. 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The exact moment, Andre and Jasmine were scheduled to make their grand entrance as husband and wife. The exact moment the live orchestra would swell, the flashbulbs would erupt, and Andre would raise a glass of imported champagne to toast his own fabricated brilliance in front of the most powerful people in the city. I locked the execution coordinates into the terminal. I set the automated trigger for exactly 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday. The code compiled, the system confirmed the scheduled task, and the digital lock engaged. There was no overriding it now. I smiled, closed my laptop, and listened to the quiet hum of the Parisian morning. The crisp evening air of Paris carried a quiet, undeniable elegance. I sat at a corner table of a dimly lit exclusive bistro in the Marais district, a half-empty glass of vintage Bordeaux resting on the small marble tabletop. The ambient noise of the city was a soothing murmur of clinking silverware and hushed French conversations. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the digital circus currently unfolding on the glowing, high-resolution screen of my phone. It was rapidly approaching 10 o'clock at night local time. In Atlanta, it was just before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The execution window was opening. My device sat propped against a small, flickering candle, the screen divided into two distinct digital feeds. On the left side, I watched the live social media stories being aggressively uploaded by Kendra. She had completely bypassed her own burner accounts and was broadcasting directly from her main public profile, ensuring her entire network witnessed the spectacle. On the right side of the screen, a secure encrypted chat window remained open, delivering a steady, clinical stream of real-time text messages from Greg. He was providing the objective play-by-play commentary that Kendra's heavily filtered lenses purposefully failed to capture. The visual evidence Kendra proudly displayed was genuinely nauseating. Andre had spared absolutely no expense to fabricate his financial dominance. The historic Atlanta mansion he had rented was completely transformed into a suffocating monument to his fragile ego. Massive cascading installations of imported white orchids hung from the vaulted ceilings, dripping over the grand mahogany staircases. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above tables draped in custom silk linens. Waitstaff in crisp white gloves circulated through the manicured gardens, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and glasses of $1,000 champagne. Kendra panned her camera across the courtyard, her voice shrill and triumphant as she narrated the event. She zoomed in on a towering ice sculpture carved into the corporate logo of Apex Luxury Holdings, completely oblivious to the fact that the company she was celebrating was mathematically dead. She posted a photo of Jasmine posing in the bridal suite, draped in her $40,000 custom gown, wearing a diamond necklace that Andre had almost certainly acquired through a predatory short-term lease. Kendra's captions were dripping with toxic vindication. She typed aggressive hashtags about elite upgrades, real wealth, and leaving the past behind, entirely convinced she was winning a war I had already ended. I took a slow sip of my wine and shifted my focus to Greg's incoming messages. "The sheer volume of wasted capital in this room is actually making me physically ill," Greg texted. He hired a 20-piece string quartet just for the cocktail hour. The floral budget alone could have covered his missed commercial property tax payments for the next 3 quarters. I am standing near the ice sculpture. It is melting rapidly. It feels highly poetic. Keep me updated on his demeanor. I typed back, my thumbs moving swiftly across the glass keyboard. He knows the default notice is pending. He is running on pure adrenaline. He is completely manic, Greg confirmed seconds later. Andre is sweating straight through his custom tuxedo jacket. He keeps checking his phone every 30 seconds. He is barely paying attention to the guests. He is actively treating his own wedding reception like a frantic corporate networking event. He is literally handing out Apex Luxury Holdings business cards to the catering managers and the valet drivers. He is desperate to project absolute dominance. I could picture the scene perfectly. Andre was standing in the middle of a $500,000 party surrounded by hundreds of people, completely paralyzed by the terrifying realization that his corporate accounts were empty. He was desperately hoping to secure a miracle investment before the banks opened on Monday morning. He was praying his creditors would grant him the grace period his lawyers had begged for. He had absolutely no idea that his primary creditor was currently sitting in a Parisian cafe watching him squirm through a digital peephole. "Vivian is in rare form," Greg texted, sending a candid photo of my former mother-in-law holding court near the main bar. Vivian was draped in a heavily sequined emerald gown, wearing a hat so massive it practically required its own zip code. According to Greg's continuous updates, she was loudly boasting to a group of minor local politicians and mid-level real estate developers. She was strutting around the venue aggressively, commanding the attention of anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact with her. She just spent 10 minutes telling a local county judge that Andre's success is entirely unmatched in this city, Greg wrote. She is literally telling people that Apex Luxury Holdings is acquiring the entire downtown commercial district. She is boasting about how Andre is entirely self-made, completely ignoring the fact that you built the entire foundational structure of his business. Now she is talking about Jasmine. I watched the text bubble appear as Greg typed his next message. Vivian is projecting hard. She is telling the wives of the commercial banking executives how relieved the family is that Andre finally found a partner who naturally fits into high society. She is calling Jasmine a beautiful, classy woman who actually understands how to manage wealth and status. She is taking direct shots at you, Zara. She is telling them that Andre's previous situation severely held him back from his true potential. I smiled, setting my wine glass down on the marble coaster. Vivian's loud delusions were the perfect soundtrack to her impending humiliation. She was standing in a venue funded by toxic mezzanine debt, praising a woman who was marrying a bankrupt fraud, and insulting the only person who actually possessed the capital to save them. The irony was so rich, it was practically tangible. The digital clock on my workstation screen, perfectly synced to my phone, flipped to 3:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The automated execution sequence I had programmed was quietly initiating its final pre-flight checks in the background of my encrypted offshore servers. The uniform commercial code filings were queued. The bank account garnishment directives were locked and loaded. The legal foreclosure notices for the commercial properties, the luxury vehicles, and the Buckhead estate were perfectly aligned, ready to launch through the digital ether directly to the Fulton County courts and Andre's corporate inbox. "They are moving everyone into the main ballroom," Greg texted. "The cocktail hour is officially ending. The event staff is closing the heavy garden doors. They are preparing for the grand entrance. Andre and Jasmine are lining up in the main foyer." I leaned forward, my pulse maintaining a steady, rhythmic beat. I was not nervous. I was entirely focused. This was the exact moment I had engineered. Andre was about to walk into a room of 500 people expecting thunderous applause and the ultimate validation of his massive ego. He was expecting a royal coronation. The clock shifted to 3:52 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. "The string quartet just transitioned to the grand entrance music," Greg reported. "Vivian is standing right by the main double doors, positioning herself perfectly for the event photographers. She wants to be in every single frame of the entrance footage. Andre is pacing. He looks like he is going to physically be sick." He was going to be sick. He had spent the last 48 hours purposefully ignoring the terrifying silence from Obsidian Capital Management. He had convinced himself that the silence meant his expensive lawyers had successfully negotiated a temporary grace period. He had convinced himself he was completely safe. The clock hit 3:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 5 minutes until the automated system engaged the absolute destruction of Apex Luxury Holdings. My phone vibrated violently against the table. The encrypted chat window flashed. "Zara," Greg typed. "I am here," I responded. The typing indicator danced on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds before the text fully populated. "Arthur Sterling just walked through the front doors. He completely ignored the valet staff and parked his own car aggressively on the manicured lawn. He did not go to the ballroom. He did not greet Vivian. He is not smiling. I stared at the screen, my forensic mind rapidly calculating the variables. Arthur Sterling was the most notoriously conservative and powerful commercial banker in the Southeast. He was the man Andre had desperately tried to impress to save his failing corporate entity. Another text from Greg immediately appeared. He looks absolutely furious. He is clutching a thick manila folder. He just shoved past the lead event coordinator. He is walking straight toward Andre's table. I smiled, the cool Parisian evening air brushing against my face. I opened my laptop, pulling up the master execution terminal, and waited for the clock to strike 4. The digital clock on my secondary monitor clicked to exactly 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. A green progress bar flashed across the black screen, accelerating from 0 to 100% in a fraction of a second. The automated strike was live. Across the Atlantic Ocean, every single digital lock I had coded slammed shut. Corporate accounts vanished. Credit lines flatlined. Foreclosure notices injected themselves into the Fulton County Judicial Registry and Andre's personal servers. I folded my hands on the marble table of the Parisian cafe and stared intently at my phone screen. The trap had sprung. Now I just needed the blast report. My device sat propped against a small flickering candle, the screen divided into 2 distinct digital feeds. On the left side, I watched the live social media stories being aggressively uploaded by Kendra. She had completely bypassed her own burner accounts and was broadcasting directly from her main public profile, ensuring her entire network witnessed the spectacle. On the right side of the screen, a secure encrypted chat window remained open, delivering a steady clinical stream of real-time text messages from Greg. He was providing the objective play-by-play commentary that Kendra's heavily filtered lenses purposefully failed to capture. The visual evidence Kendra proudly displayed was genuinely nauseating. Andre had spared absolutely no expense to fabricate his financial dominance. The historic Atlanta mansion he had rented was completely transformed into a suffocating monument to his fragile ego. Massive cascading installations of imported white orchids hung from the vaulted ceilings, dripping over the grand mahogany staircases. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above tables, draped in custom silk linens. Waitstaff in crisp white gloves circulated through the manicured gardens, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and glasses of $1,000 champagne. Kendra panned her camera across the courtyard, her voice shrill and triumphant as she narrated the event. She zoomed in on a towering ice sculpture carved into the corporate logo of Apex Luxury Holdings, completely oblivious to the fact that the company she was celebrating was mathematically dead. She posted a photo of Jasmine posing in the bridal suite, draped in her $40,000 custom gown, wearing a diamond necklace that Andre had almost certainly acquired through a predatory short-term lease. Kendra's captions were dripping with toxic vindication. She typed aggressive hashtags about elite upgrades, real wealth, and leaving the past behind, entirely convinced she was winning a war I had already ended. I took a slow sip of my wine and shifted my focus to Greg's incoming messages. The sheer volume of wasted capital in this room is actually making me physically ill, Greg texted. He hired a 20-piece string quartet just for the cocktail hour. The floral budget alone could have covered his missed commercial property tax payments for the next 3 quarters. I am standing near the ice sculpture. It is melting rapidly. It feels highly poetic. Keep me updated on his demeanor. I typed back, my thumbs moving swiftly across the glass keyboard. He knows the default notice is pending. He is running on pure adrenaline. He is completely manic, Greg confirmed seconds later. Andre is sweating straight through his custom tuxedo jacket. He keeps checking his phone every 30 seconds. He is barely paying attention to the guests. He is actively treating his own wedding reception like a frantic corporate networking event. He is literally handing out Apex Luxury Holdings business cards to the catering managers and the valet drivers. He is desperate to project absolute dominance. I could picture the scene perfectly. Andre was standing in the middle of a $500,000 party surrounded by hundreds of people, completely paralyzed by the terrifying realization that his corporate accounts were empty. He was desperately hoping to secure a miracle investment before the banks opened on Monday morning. He was praying his creditors would grant him the grace period his lawyers had begged for. He had absolutely no idea that his primary creditor was currently sitting in a Parisian cafe, watching him squirm through a digital peephole. "Vivian is in rare form," Greg texted, sending a candid photo of my former mother-in-law holding court near the main bar. Vivian was draped in a heavily sequined emerald gown, wearing a hat so massive it practically required its own zip code. According to Greg's continuous updates, she was loudly boasting to a group of minor local politicians and mid-level real estate developers. She was strutting around the venue aggressively, commanding the attention of anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact with her. She just spent 10 minutes telling a local county judge that Andre's success is entirely unmatched in this city, Greg wrote. She is literally telling people that Apex Luxury Holdings is acquiring the entire downtown commercial district. She is boasting about how Andre is entirely self-made, completely ignoring the fact that you built the entire foundational structure of his business. Now she is talking about Jasmine. I watched the text bubble appear as Greg typed his next message. Vivian is projecting hard. She is telling the wives of the commercial banking executives how relieved the family is that Andre finally found a partner who naturally fits into high society. She is calling Jasmine a beautiful, classy woman who actually understands how to manage wealth and status. She is taking direct shots at you, Zara. She is telling them that Andre's previous situation severely held him back from his true potential. I smiled, setting my wine glass down on the marble coaster. Vivian's loud delusions were the perfect soundtrack to her impending humiliation. She was standing in a venue funded by toxic mezzanine debt, praising a woman who was marrying a bankrupt fraud and insulting the only person who actually possessed the capital to save them. The irony was so rich it was practically tangible. "They are moving everyone into the main ballroom," Greg texted. "The cocktail hour is officially ending. The event staff is closing the heavy doors. They are preparing for the grand entrance. Andre and Jasmine are lining up in the main foyer." I leaned forward, my pulse maintaining a steady rhythmic beat. I was not nervous. I was entirely focused. This was the exact moment I had engineered. Andre was about to walk into a room of 500 people expecting thunderous applause and the ultimate validation of his massive ego. He was expecting a royal coronation. "The string quartet just transitioned to the grand entrance music," Greg reported. Vivian is standing right by the main double doors, positioning herself perfectly for the event photographers. She wants to be in every single frame of the entrance footage. Andre is pacing. He looks like he is going to physically be sick. My phone vibrated violently against the table. The encrypted chat window flashed. "Zara," Greg typed. "I am here," I responded. The typing indicator danced on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds before the text fully populated. Arthur Sterling just walked through the front doors. He completely ignored the valet staff and parked his own car aggressively on the manicured lawn. He did not go to the ballroom. He did not greet Vivian. He is not smiling. I stared at the screen, my forensic mind rapidly calculating the variables. Arthur Sterling was the most notoriously conservative and powerful commercial banker in the Southeast. He was the man Andre had desperately tried to impress to save his failing corporate entity. Another text from Greg immediately appeared. "He looks absolutely furious. He is clutching a thick manila folder. He just shoved past the lead event coordinator. He is walking straight toward Andre's table." "He is right in front of the head table," Greg typed a moment later. Andre just spotted him. He is totally oblivious to Sterling's mood. Andre is literally puffing out his chest. He thinks Sterling is walking over to hand him $1 million wedding gift or a partnership agreement. He is adjusting his tie. I watched Kendra's live feed out of the corner of my eye. Her camera was pointed toward the dance floor, but I could see the commotion near the bridal table in the background. Vivian was aggressively elbowing her way through a group of bridesmaids to stand directly behind her son, eager to bask in the glow of the billionaire's attention. "Andre is stepping forward," Greg's next message read. "He has that fake, arrogant smile plastered on his face. He is extending his hand. He just called him Artie. He actually called Arthur Sterling Artie. I let out a sharp, cold laugh. Arthur Sterling despised familiarity from his peers, let alone from a heavily leveraged fraud attempting to play in his sandbox. Sterling did not take his hand. Greg texted the messages flying in fast now. He stepped right past Andre. He completely ignored Vivian. He grabbed a glass of champagne off a waiter's tray. He just picked up a silver fork from the dessert spread. The atmosphere in the ballroom must have been rapidly deteriorating. Billionaires do not typically hijack wedding receptions unless they intend to make a highly public statement. Sterling was a man of immense pride. Andre had insulted that pride by assuming he could use Sterling as a prop for his fake empire. Worse, Sterling was one of the oldest, most loyal clients of my forensic accounting firm. I had personally audited his commercial portfolios for years. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what Andre had done to me. When the automated foreclosure notices had hit his banking syndicate's server at 4 o'clock, Sterling would have instantly recognized the signature of my work. "He is tapping the glass," Greg wrote. I switched my attention entirely to Kendra's live feed. She had finally noticed the disruption. Her phone camera violently swung away from the dance floor and zoomed in on the bridal table. The audio feed was muddy, filled with the background noise of 500 people talking, but a sharp rhythmic ringing cut through the din. Clink, clink, clink. The crisp sound of silver striking crystal echoed over the venue's massive speaker system. Sterling had stepped up to the microphone positioned for the best man's speech. On Kendra's screen, I watched the crowd slowly turn their attention toward the front of the room. The low roar of conversation began to die down. "The whole room is looking at him," Greg's text confirmed. Andre is standing right next to him. He still thinks this is a congratulatory toast. He is actually waving to the crowd, encouraging them to quiet down and listen to the great Arthur Sterling. It was the absolute zenith of Andre's delusion. He was standing at the pinnacle of a mountain built entirely on lies, grinning down at the people he believed he had conquered, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was already gone. Beside him, Jasmine was beaming, her hands clasped under her chin, waiting for the billionaire to validate her choice of husband. Sterling stood dead center, holding the champagne flute aloft. He did not look at the crowd. He turned his head and locked eyes directly with Andre. Even through the compressed video quality of a social media live stream, the absolute contempt radiating from Sterling's face was palpable. Sterling leaned into the microphone. His voice boomed through the vaulted ceilings of the historic mansion, commanding absolute silence. "I have attended countless events in my 40 years of business." Sterling's voice echoed cold and authoritative. "But I have never witnessed a display quite like this. I feel compelled to offer my profound congratulations to the groom." On the screen, Andre's chest puffed out further. He shot a triumphant look at Vivian, who was practically vibrating with validation. "It takes a lot of nerve," Sterling continued, his tone dropping an octave, slicing through the room like a razor blade. "It takes a truly staggering amount of nerve to throw a $500,000 party the exact same day your ex-wife's firm legally liquidates your entire portfolio for default." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. On Kendra's stream, the camera jerked wildly as she gasped. I watched Andre's face. The arrogant, triumphant smile did not just fade, it shattered. His jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face so rapidly his skin turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just been violently struck in the chest. Sterling did not break eye contact with my ex-husband. He raised the crystal flute higher, the sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "Cheers to bankruptcy, son." Sterling took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne. He placed the glass down on the pristine white tablecloth. He then tossed the thick manila folder he had been carrying directly onto Andre's chest. The folder bounced off his custom crimson lapel and spilled onto the floor, scattering copies of the absolute foreclosure notices and asset freezes I had just initiated. Sterling turned his back on the groom and began walking calmly out of the ballroom, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. Even through the live feed, the lack of sound was terrifying. The 20-piece string quartet, which had been softly playing classical arrangements in the background, halted mid-note. The bows froze on the strings. The polite, wealthy murmur of 500 Atlanta elites evaporated into a suffocating, breathless void. Every single champagne flute lowered. Every eye in the room was pinned directly on Andre. Vivian's emerald hat bobbed as she stared at the scattered foreclosure documents on the floor, her mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. The elite socialites she had been boasting to just moments ago were now staring at her with naked horror and disgust. Her entire fabricated reality, decades of carefully constructed social climbing, had been vaporized in 2 sentences. Next to Andre, Jasmine looked completely paralyzed. She stared at the retreating back of Arthur Sterling, then slowly turned her head to look at her new husband. The man who had promised her unlimited wealth, luxury estates, and a life of elite privilege. The man whose bank accounts were currently sitting at absolute zero. Her hand went slack. The imported crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the polished marble floor of the ballroom. The shattering glass sounded like a gunshot in the dead, silent room. And then the real chaos began. Through the live stream, I heard it. A sharp, aggressive vibration echoing from the breast pocket of Andre's custom tuxedo. The automated alerts from the 4 o'clock trigger were finally pushing through the cellular network. His phone buzzed again, and again. A violent, unrelenting sequence of notifications, automated fraud alerts from his commercial bank, foreclosure notifications from the Fulton County court system, zero balance warnings from his personal checking accounts, overdraft alerts from his platinum credit cards. The phone vibrated so intensely it was visibly shaking the fabric of his jacket. Andre panicked. He ripped the phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide and terrified, as the cascading wall of red notifications flooded his lock screen, broadcasting his complete and utter ruin to the silent room. The red glow from Andre's screen was so bright it reflected off the polished silver cutlery on the table. Through Kendra's live feed, I watched him frantically tap the glass, his thumb swiping upward to unlock the device. The biometric scanner failed. His hands were trembling too violently. He punched in his passcode, his fingers slipping, forcing him to re-enter it 3 times before the home screen finally yielded. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly what he was seeing. I had built the notification protocols myself. The banking app for Apex Luxury Holdings would be locked down behind a brutalist, unyielding digital wall. Andre bypassed the alerts and forced his way into his primary checking application. The loading circle spun for 2 agonizing seconds. When the interface populated, the number displayed in the center of the screen was an absolute devastating 0. He clicked into the corporate credit line. Frozen. He checked his personal offshore reserve, the one he thought I did not know about, the one I had legally garnished 40 minutes prior. 0. Greg's texts began firing into my encrypted chat window with machine gun rapidity. "He is hyperventilating," Greg wrote. "He just tried to show his phone to his best man, but his hands are shaking too much. He is repeatedly refreshing the banking app like it is going to miraculously generate capital. Zara, he looks like he is going to pass out." The stunned silence that had blanketed the ballroom following Arthur Sterling's theatrical exit was rapidly dissolving. It was being replaced by a low, buzzing hum of 500 highly influential people collectively realizing they had been invited to a fraud. They were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. Suddenly, the crowd near the kitchen entrance violently parted. The celebrity wedding planner, a woman who charged 6 figures just to oversee the floral arrangements, came marching out of the service corridor. She was not walking, she was stalking. Her professional, invisible demeanor had entirely vanished. She wore a sleek black headset, her face contorted in absolute fury, clutching an iPad like a weapon. She did not wait for an appropriate moment. She did not whisper. She bypassed the bridesmaids, ignored the groomsmen, and marched directly up to the sweetheart table where Andre was still frantically swiping at his dead phone. "Andre!" The planner snapped, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of the ballroom. Kendra had managed to sneak her phone closer to the head table, capturing the audio with crystal clarity. Your accounts are frozen. The final processing payment for the venue, the catering syndicate, and my personal retainer just hard bounced. The terminal threw a code 05, fraud and seizure. Andre looked up, his eyes glassy and uncomprehending. It is a mistake. He stammered, his voice weak and completely devoid of its usual booming arrogance. It is a routing error. I will call my banker right now. Just run the secondary card. I ran the secondary card, the planner barked, slapping the iPad down on the table perilously close to Jasmine's shattered champagne flute. I ran the secondary corporate card. I ran your personal platinum card. I even ran the offshore account you gave me for emergencies. Every single piece of plastic you possess is declining. My terminal is literally instructing me to confiscate your cards. I am not running a charity, Andre. I need $85,000 in cleared funds right this second, or I am pulling the plug. Vivian, sensing the catastrophic shift in the room, tried to intervene. She pushed past a waiter and grabbed the planner's arm. How dare you speak to my son this way? Do you know who we are? We are the Bennetts. We own half of this city. We will ruin your business for this disrespect. The planner ripped her arm out of Vivian's grasp, her eyes blazing. You do not own anything, she sneered, her voice carrying easily to the first 3 rows of guest tables. Your son just got publicly foreclosed on by Arthur Sterling. You are completely broke, and I am shutting this circus down. She tapped her headset. Code red. Pull it. Pull everything right now. What followed was the most spectacular, brutally efficient dismantling of luxury I had ever witnessed. The vendor revolt was instantaneous. The wedding planner had not been bluffing. Within seconds of her command, the heavy service doors swung open. A small army of catering staff, who had previously been circulating with silver trays of imported delicacies, abruptly stopped serving. They did not simply walk away, they actively began reclaiming the food. Through Kendra's live feed, I watched a waiter politely but firmly pull a plate of butter-poached lobster directly out from under a stunned local politician's fork. The bartenders at the custom ice bars immediately reached over and snatched the bottles of vintage champagne, tossing them into plastic crates hidden beneath the counter. They began aggressively packing up the premium liquor, leaving bewildered guests holding empty crystal glasses. On the far side of the room, the reception DJ, who had been setting up his massive audio rig for the post-dinner dancing, simply killed the main power strip. The ambient house music died instantly. He began frantically wrapping thick black cables and shoving his expensive mixing boards into reinforced travel cases. The visual degradation was staggering. The staff began physically stripping the silk tablecloths from the empty reserve tables. The illusion of Apex Luxury Holdings was being disassembled in real time, exposed as a cheap rental that could not be paid for. The reaction from the Atlanta elite was exactly what I had anticipated. These were people who violently guarded their reputations. They survived on proximity to power and wealth, and Andre had just been exposed as a financial leper. The contagion of his bankruptcy was highly infectious, and nobody wanted to be caught standing in the quarantine zone. The retreat began as a trickle and rapidly turned into a stampede. Greg's texts fired across my screen, a steady drumbeat of absolute social destruction. The mayor is leaving, Greg typed. He just signaled his security detail and bolted for the side exit. He did not even look at Andre. The commercial banking syndicate tables are completely empty. They stood up the second the DJ cut the power. They are literally power walking to the valet. Vivian is losing her mind. She is grabbing people by the arms as they try to leave. She just tried to stop the vice president of Vanguard Commercial. She is begging them to stay, telling them it is just a misunderstanding. He physically shoved her hand away and told her not to touch him. The ballroom, which had been packed wall to wall with 500 of the most influential people in the state, was emptying out with terrifying speed. Women in couture gowns were lifting their hemlines and practically sprinting toward the grand foyer. Men in tailored suits were barking aggressively into their phones, likely calling their own legal teams to distance themselves from any recent dealings with Apex Luxury Holdings. Andre stood frozen behind the sweetheart table. He was a captain going down with a ship that had never truly existed. He looked around the massive, rapidly clearing room, watching the waiters cart away his fake wealth, watching the people he desperately wanted to impress flee from him like he was diseased. But the final fatal blow did not come from the retreating bankers or the aggressive wedding planner, or even from my automated digital strike. It came from the woman standing directly next to him. Jasmine had remained entirely silent since Arthur Sterling had dropped the foreclosure documents onto Andre's chest. I had watched her process the event in real time through the video feed. I saw the exact moment the delusion shattered. She looked at the scattered legal papers. She looked at the furious wedding planner demanding cash. She looked at the catering staff stripping the tables, and finally she looked at the mass exodus of the billionaires and politicians she had planned to spend the rest of her life mingling with. Jasmine had not married Andre for love. She had married the private jets, the Buckhead estate, and the unlimited platinum cards. She had endured Vivian's suffocating arrogance and Andre's monumental ego specifically for the lifestyle. And in the span of exactly 4 minutes, that lifestyle had been completely vaporized. She slowly leaned down and picked up the microphone that Arthur Sterling had left resting on the edge of the sweetheart table. The microphone was still hot, connected directly to the main speaker array that the DJ had not yet dismantled. The feedback squealed sharply, a piercing sound that caused the remaining guests, mostly confused extended family, and the horrified bridal party to freeze and cover their ears. Jasmine did not look at the crowd. She turned her entire body to face Andre. The sweet, demure trophy wife persona she had carefully maintained for the last 18 months completely vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You broke, pathetic, lying fraud." Jasmine's voice exploded through the massive speakers, the sheer volume shaking the remaining crystal centerpieces. Andre physically recoiled, raising his hands in a desperate pleading gesture. "Jasmine, baby, wait, listen to me. I can fix this. I have investors. I have the downtown project. It is just a liquidity issue. Do not you dare lie to me," she screamed, taking a step toward him, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the microphone. "I gave up my career for this. I put up with your psychotic mother for this. I smiled and played your little society game because you swore to me we were building an empire. You told me you owned the city." She kicked at the scattered foreclosure documents on the floor, her custom designer heel tearing through the heavy legal paper. "You own nothing. You are nothing. You brought me out here in front of half the state to humiliate me. You cannot even afford the food on the plates." "Jasmine, please keep your voice down," Andre begged, his eyes darting frantically toward the few remaining guests, his obsession with his image overriding his survival instincts even now. Vivian rushed forward, her face purple with rage. "You ungrateful gold digger! Do not you dare speak to my son that way. You are lucky he even looked at you." Jasmine whipped her head toward Vivian, the microphone capturing her harsh, mocking laugh. "Lucky? You think I am lucky? You are both completely delusional. You are standing in the middle of a rented room you cannot pay for, wearing rented diamonds, pretending to be royalty. You are a joke. You are both a massive, pathetic joke." Jasmine turned back to Andre. She reached up and unclasped the massive diamond necklace from her throat. She did not hand it to him. She threw it directly at his face. The heavy jewel struck his cheekbone and clattered onto the table. "I am done," Jasmine declared, her voice echoing through the hollow, empty ballroom. "Have fun paying for your own fake wedding, Andre. I am filing for an annulment before the ink on the marriage license even dries." She dropped the microphone. It hit the marble floor with a deafening metallic crash that reverberated through the entire mansion. Without another word, she gathered the massive skirts of her $40,000 gown, turned her back on her husband, and marched out of the room, leaving Andre Bennett standing completely alone in the wreckage of his own design. Jasmine halted just inches from the heavy mahogany exit doors. The deafening crash of the dropped microphone was still ringing through the vaulted ceilings, but Vivian could not let the spectacle end there. Vivian, fueled by a toxic cocktail of maternal delusion and sheer embarrassment, lunged forward. She grabbed the trailing silk train of Jasmine's $40,000 wedding gown, yanking it backward with entirely too much force. Jasmine spun around the heavy fabric, ripping audibly at the seam. Vivian pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at the bride's face. "You ungrateful tramp!" Vivian screeched, her voice echoing through the hollow, dismantled room. You are nothing but a gold digger. You ruined my son's perfect day. We are the Bennets. We have generational wealth. You are lucky we even allowed you to attach your name to our family legacy. You will leave this property right now, and you will not see a single dime of our money." Jasmine threw her head back and let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. It was a sound devoid of any joy, completely unhinged and dripping with pure malice. She marched right back toward Vivian, closing the distance until they were practically nose to nose. The remaining guests, paralyzed by the sheer gravity of the drama, watched in absolute silence. "Generational wealth," Jasmine shouted, gesturing wildly at the scattered foreclosure notices still littering the dance floor. "Your son is a bankrupt fraud, Vivian, and the only reason I am wearing this ridiculous white dress is because I am just as broke as he is." Vivian recoiled, her eyes wide with shock. Jasmine did not give her a second to recover. She unleashed a torrent of financial truth that obliterated the final remnants of the Bennett family facade. "I am $400,000 in the hole, Vivian," Jasmine sneered, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "I have 3 maxed-out platinum cards. I owe $500,000 to a private equity lender who funded my failed lifestyle brand. I married your idiot son because he projected the exact illusion of liquidity I needed to save myself from bankruptcy. You told me he was acquiring the downtown commercial district. I assumed he had private equity backing. I assumed he had a silent partner. I never imagined he was just a stupid, arrogant man playing dress-up with toxic corporate debt. We are both con artists, Vivian. The only difference is that I actually know how to play the game, and your son just got outsmarted by his ex-wife." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck by a freight train. Her jaw slackened. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate to find a single sympathetic face. "You lying snake!" Vivian stammered, her voice shaking. "Andre is a titan. He built this empire from nothing. We are elite society." Jasmine scoffed, her eyes scanning Vivian from head to toe with absolute disgust. "He built nothing. Zara built him. Zara funded him. And Zara just destroyed him. And do not you dare stand there and preach to me about high society. I know exactly who you are." Jasmine pointed a sharp fingernail directly at the massive emerald hat resting on Vivian's head. "That custom hat rented. That heavy sequined emerald gown I saw you tucking the price tags into the lining in the bridal suite so you could return it to Neiman Marcus on Monday morning. And that Birkin bag you have been flashing in front of the local politicians all night." Jasmine let out a mocking sound. "It is a high-grade counterfeit from a warehouse in Miami. I recognized the stitching defect the second you walked into the rehearsal dinner. You do not have generational wealth, Vivian. Your bank accounts are empty. You are a cheap, pathetic knockoff." The few dozen guests who had remained behind, mostly out of morbid curiosity, were now actively pulling out their phones. The flashes of cameras illuminated the dimly lit ballroom. The Atlanta elite, the socialites who thrived on gossip and scandal, were recording every single second of Vivian's absolute dismantling. Vivian's face contorted in sheer panic. She reached up to shield her face with her counterfeit bag, suddenly terrified of the camera lenses she had spent her entire life begging to be in front of. She crumbled to her knees, weeping hysterically on the marble floor. Across the room, standing near the remnants of the stripped dessert table, Kendra was experiencing her own personal apocalypse. She stared at her phone screen in absolute horror. She was still broadcasting live to her entire network. The comment section of her stream was moving so fast it was a blur of text. Thousands of people were tuning in not to marvel at Apex Luxury Holdings but to mock it mercilessly. The digital humiliation was absolute. Users were tagging the IRS, tagging luxury brands, and flooding the feed with laughing emojis. Her followers were viciously roasting the fake flowers, the bouncing credit cards, and Jasmine's brutal takedown of Vivian's counterfeit designer bags. Kendra's entire brand was built on proximity to real wealth. By attaching herself so aggressively to Andre's sinking ship, she had permanently torpedoed her own social capital. She was now the face of a spectacular financial fraud. Kendra's heavily contoured face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with her expensive mascara, leaving thick black streaks running down her cheeks. She frantically tapped the screen desperately, trying to end the broadcast, but her phone froze under the sheer volume of incoming notifications. She threw the device onto the table, buried her face in her hands, and began to sob uncontrollably. The ultimate influencer nightmare had materialized. She was officially a laughingstock. Through my encrypted feed, I watched the camera angle shift one final time. Greg was standing near the side exit, perfectly positioned in the shadows. He had captured every single moment of the implosion with high-definition clarity. The catering staff was completely gone. The DJ booth was a barren wooden table. The towering ice sculpture of the Apex Luxury Holdings logo had melted into a pathetic, unrecognizable puddle on the floor. A final text message populated on the right side of my monitor. Checkmate. I watched Greg lower his phone, turn his back on the hysterical screaming echoing across the room, and quietly slip out the side door into the cool Atlanta evening. He walked away from the wreckage without a single backward glance. Back in the center of the room, Andre Bennett was completely broken. He stood paralyzed near the sweetheart table, surrounded by the physical manifestation of his ruined ego. Jasmine had finally turned and marched out the double doors, leaving a trail of shattered illusions in her wake. Vivian was still weeping on the floor, entirely abandoned by the high society friends she had spent decades trying to impress. Andre's breathing became ragged. His chest heaved as pure panic flooded his nervous system. His vision tunneled. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears, drowning out his mother's pathetic sobbing. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking the expensive silk collar of his shirt. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped animal. He clawed at the collar of his custom tuxedo, suddenly desperate for oxygen. The room was spinning. The walls of the historic mansion were closing in on him. He looked down at the foreclosure notices scattered across the floor, at the zero balances glowing relentlessly on his phone screen. He had no cash. He had no credit lines. He had no hidden offshore assets. He had absolutely nothing. A primal, terrifying realization hijacked his brain. There was no investor coming to save him. There was no magical grace period. He was mathematically dead. Andre spun around and sprinted toward the back hallway. He shoved past a bewildered event coordinator and scrambled up the grand mahogany staircase, taking the steps two at a time. His heavy footsteps echoed off the antique wood. He burst into the bridal suite, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and threw the deadbolt. He stumbled into the marble-lined bathroom, bracing his shaking hands against the cold sink. He stared at his pale, sweating reflection in the mirror. He was drowning. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His thumbs flew across the glass screen, bypassing the dozens of missed calls from angry vendors, panicked bankers, and furious creditors. He opened his contacts list. He needed capital. He needed massive leverage. He needed a financial miracle. Most of all, he needed the only person in the entire world who actually understood the intricate, complex web of his corporate accounts. He pressed dial on Zara's name and held the phone to his ear, praying she would pick up. The muted vibration of my phone rattling against the cold marble tabletop cut through the ambient noise of the Parisian evening. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh blue glow over my half-empty glass of Bordeaux. The caller ID displayed a name I had spent the last 18 months systematically erasing from my life: Andre Bennett. I did not answer immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my palate. I looked past the glowing screen to the quiet cobblestone street of the Marais district, watching a couple stroll by under the warm amber light of a street lamp. I let the phone vibrate a second time, then a third. I wanted him to wait. I wanted the silence to stretch his already frayed nerves to the absolute breaking point. On the fourth ring, I swiped the green icon and brought the device to my ear. I did not say a word. I simply listened to the chaotic, heavy breathing echoing through the receiver. Andre was hyperventilating. The sound was pathetic, a rapid, wet gasping for air that belonged to a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse. In the background, filtering through the microphone of his device, I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of complete pandemonium. I heard the distant, shrill shrieking of his mother, Vivian, still having a full-scale meltdown in the ballroom. I heard the harsh, authoritative shouts of the venue coordinators, demanding the premises be cleared. Zara! Andre choked out, his voice cracking violently. Zara, please tell me this is a glitch. Please tell me your firm made a routing error. My accounts are frozen. Everything is locked. Arthur Sterling just threw a stack of foreclosure notices in my face. You have to lift the freeze. You have to fix this right now. I remained entirely silent, letting the cool evening breeze brush across my face. My silence operated like a vacuum, sucking the remaining oxygen right out of his lungs. Are you listening to me? He practically screamed, the panic stripping away every ounce of the artificial baritone he usually affected. The wedding planner is threatening to have me arrested for fraud. The catering staff took the food away. Everyone left. The mayor walked out. Do you understand what is happening? You have to wire the funds back. You have to undo whatever your algorithms just did to my corporate lines. I understand exactly what is happening, Andre. I finally replied, my voice steady, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. The automated protocols executed precisely as they were programmed to. There is no glitch. There is no routing error. Obsidian Capital Management has formally initiated a total asset seizure due to a catastrophic breach of contract. Breach of contract? Andre gasped, the desperation morphing into a frantic, high-pitched whine. What are you talking about? We had a grace period. My lawyers spoke to your people. We were restructuring the mezzanine debt. You cannot just liquidate a holding company without notice. You had a 30-day grace period to secure secondary funding. I corrected him smoothly, enjoying the absolute precision of my own trap. A period that expired at exactly 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time today. My firm did not acquire your corporate debt to offer you a lifeline, Andre. We acquired it to hold you accountable. When you failed to make the required capital injection by the close of the business day, the default clauses triggered automatically. You cannot do this to me, he sobbed. He was actually sobbing now, the tears clearly audible as he choked on his own words. Zara, please. This is my wedding day. You are destroying my life. Jasmine just walked out on me. She took off the necklace and threw it at me. She is filing for an annulment. I am standing in a bathroom hiding from the vendors because I do not have a single dollar to my name. The sheer speed at which he crumbled was staggering. The man who had spent the last 2 years parading his mistresses around Atlanta, who had hidden assets during our divorce, who had allowed his mother to ruthlessly mock my career, was now cowering in a bathroom stall, weeping like a terrified child. If Jasmine walked out, it is because she finally saw the balance sheet, I said coldly. She married the illusion of a titan, but we both know you were never a titan, Andre. You were just a man spending my money, relying on my financial structures and playing pretend. I made a mistake, Andre wailed, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. Zara, I made a massive mistake. Jasmine means absolutely nothing to me. She is a gold digger. She just admitted she is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. She used me. I was blind. I was so stupid. I will call off the annulment and file for a divorce myself today. I will banish my mother from the state. I will do whatever you want. Please, Zara, I want you back. I am begging you. I am literally begging you on my hands and knees. Just lift the freeze and we can start over. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the master execution terminal on my laptop screen. The sheer audacity of his bargaining was almost impressive. He genuinely believed he could manipulate his way out of a mathematical execution by offering me the empty shell of his affection. I do not raise my voice, Andre, and I do not repeat myself, I said, my tone dropping to a chilling whisper. So I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to start over. You are going to face the exact financial ruin you legally signed up for during our divorce mediation. He let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, but he stopped talking. When you were too busy taking Jasmine to the Maldives, you neglected to read the fine print on the asset division agreement. I continued, articulating every word with absolute clarity. You signed away your protection against cross-collateralization. You allowed your personal holdings to guarantee the corporate debt of Apex Luxury Holdings. You thought you were outsmarting me by rushing the settlement. You thought I was walking away empty-handed. I didn't know, he cried. My lawyers said it was standard boilerplate language. Your lawyers are idiots, I countered. And so are you. Because of those personal guarantees, the default at 4 o'clock triggered a domino effect. The Buckhead estate you rented to impress the city. The lease is terminated. The fleet of luxury cars you used to project your fake dominance. The repossession agents are already en route to the venue parking lot. Every single corporate account, every hidden offshore reserve, and the entire operating structure of Apex Luxury Holdings now legally belongs to Obsidian Capital Management. You took everything, he whispered, his voice completely hollowed out, sounding like a ghost of the man who had confidently walked into the ballroom just an hour ago. I took back exactly what was mine, I corrected him. You built a house of cards using my foundation. I simply pulled out the bottom row. What am I supposed to do? He begged, the panic rising in his throat again. Zara, the wedding planner, is going to call the police. I cannot pay the valet. I cannot pay the catering syndicate. I do not even have the money to pay for the gas to drive home. You do not have a home to drive to, I reminded him gently. The locks on the Buckhead estate were changed digitally 20 minutes ago. Your personal access codes have been revoked. A long, agonizing silence stretched across the transatlantic connection. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing. I could hear the absolute devastation crushing him under its weight. He had finally realized that there was no exit. There was no negotiation. He was entirely at my mercy, and I had none left to give. Enjoy your annulment, Andre, I said, my voice light, crisp, and final. I highly recommend finding a cheap motel near the highway. I hear they do not check credit scores for a single night's stay. Have a wonderful honeymoon. Zara, wait, please, you cannot. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button, cutting off his desperate, pathetic plea mid-sentence. I immediately opened my contact settings. I scrolled down to his name, selected the profile, and tapped block caller. A small confirmation window popped up on the screen. I hit confirm. Andre Bennett was officially permanently erased from my digital and physical existence. I set the phone face down on the table. I looked at my laptop screen one last time. The dashboard showed a sea of green indicators. The asset transfers were fully confirmed. The corporate acquisitions were locked. The hostile takeover of his entire life was complete. I reached forward and snapped the laptop shut. The soft click of the closing device felt like a period at the end of a very long, very exhausting novel. I picked up the delicate pale green pistachio macaron resting on the porcelain saucer next to my wine glass. I took a slow bite. The sugar and crushed nuts tasted exceptionally sweet against my palate. I picked up my glass of Bordeaux, stood up from the cafe table, and stepped out toward the edge of the small terrace. The Parisian night was fully alive now. The distant sparkling lights of the Eiffel Tower illuminated the horizon, casting a beautiful golden shimmer over the city. The air smelled of fresh rain and expensive perfume. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean air. I was completely free. I was phenomenally wealthy, and I had achieved absolute undisputed victory. This story teaches that genuine success is built on a foundation of hard work, authenticity, and unwavering integrity, rather than deceit and manipulation. Andre's catastrophic downfall illustrates the inevitable consequences of constructing an empire on lies and exploiting the labor of others. True power does not come from projecting a fabricated image or tearing others down, but from developing real competence and self-reliance. Zara's ultimate triumph proves that maintaining focus, outsmarting your detractors, and letting natural consequences take their course is the ultimate form of sweet revenge against those who underestimate your absolute worth. If you found the story of ultimate vindication satisfying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own experiences of triumphing over toxic people in the comments below.